My great kingdom of Italy. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 276 Marriage Event. Carlo is not clear about the situation, where Italy's goodwill has been eaten away. Because he has done his best. After all, he is now the king of Italy and needs to be responsible for the kingdom of Italy. But he was responsible for the kingdom of Italy, and there were people who wanted to be responsible for him. Don't get me wrong. It's not that someone wants to take advantage of him. It's just that there are some things that can't be put off. Your Majesty, the Queen Mother invites you. The old nanny next to his mother appeared in front of Carlo, saying that his mother was looking for him. When Carlo heard that his mother was looking for him, he knew what was going on without having to guess. The pen in my hand was tightened unconsciously. Didn't you see that I'm busy? I'll be there in a moment. Carlo's rhetoric had no deterrent effect in front of the old nanny. Your Majesty, if you don't go over, the Queen Mother will come in person. Upon hearing what the old nanny said, Carlo knew that he couldn't hide, so he had no choice but to respond. Wait a moment, while I process the documents in my hand. Following Carlo's words, the old nanny stopped talking, but she did not leave, but stood aside and waited. Faced with this unavoidable situation, Carlo could only get rid of the documents in his hands. For a while, except for the rustle of writing, the room became very quiet. Let's go. After dealing with the matters at hand, Carlo glanced at the old nanny who was standing aside, clapped his hands and stood up. Where is mother now? The Queen Mother is currently in the pavilion in the back garden. After getting the location from the old nanny, Carlo led the way and went ahead. In the garden, Queen Mother Margherita, who is in her early 50s, is wearing glasses and holding a photo, and considering it carefully. The photos are all young and beautiful women, each of them an aristocratic unmarried woman with a good background. Next to Queen Margherita, a lady with a very good relationship was constantly introducing the origin of the girls in these photos to her. Oh, this is Trippier Grace, the youngest daughter of Count Trippier's family. I have met her several times before, but I heard that her reputation is not very good. There are several young men who are jealous of her. Hearing the words of a fat lady beside her, Queen Margherita calmly put aside the photo of the girl named Trippier Grace in her hand. Mother, are you looking for me? When Carlo saw his mother sunbathing in the garden, he rushed over and asked with a smile on his face. Seeing her eldest son appearing in front of her, Queen Margherita immediately recovered from her laziness and spoke with a serious face. It seems that if I don't look for you, you won't even want to see me. Hearing his mother's complaints, Carlo hurriedly coaxed, I'm not busy. No matter how busy you are, you can't just ignore it. Queen Margherita said as she picked up a photo. Now that I'm older, you are also the king of a country and I have no control over you. What do you think of this photo? A photo of a girl was placed in Carlo's hands by her mother. What do you think of this? Maria Luisa, the eldest daughter of the Duke of Parma, is said to be a good girl who loves literature. After hearing his mother's introduction, Carlo's attention was not focused on the photo at all. He couldn't help but think of a beautiful woman who had left sadly. Mom, you know I don't like literary young women very much. I'm just moaning for no reason. After hearing Carlo's words, Queen Margherita immediately straightened her face. Who said it was about choosing a girl? This is for your brother Vittorio. Forehead. Carlo was a little caught off guard by the sudden attack, and he didn't expect that he was just being sentimental. It's Vittorio. Who do you think it is? This kind of implicit suggestion cannot break Carlo's defense at all. But having said that, Carlo's younger brother is now 23 years old, and it's time to get married. Since there is more brother Carlo than in history, Vittorio now has become a literature lover, gathering with many writers every day, and having a great time. Moreover, the two have a very good relationship. Carlo often talks with his brother in his spare time. Now that he was no longer involved, Carlo felt relieved. If that's the case, why did you ask me to come over, mother? A lot of things are waiting for me in the kingdom now. It's so difficult for you to care about your brother's marriage besides work. The Queen Mother Margherita, who was talking, took the photo back from Carlo. You can also give me some advice. It's good. I feel like this girl is also suitable for Vittorio. Faced with his mother's inquiry, Carlo still gave his own advice. Although this girl does not meet my own aesthetic standards, she is really good, based on the current European aesthetics. After hearing her eldest son's suggestion, Queen Margherita looked at the photo with satisfaction. In that case, it's her decision. Next, arrange for Vittorio to meet with him. If he doesn't object, then it will be done. Carlo, who had witnessed a European-style arranged marriage with his own eyes, could say nothing at this time. He could only reduce his sense of presence as much as possible to prevent the flames of war from burning him. But after all, old age is still hotter, and Carlo underestimated his mother's thoughts. Carlo, you see that even your brother is getting married. As the king's brother, shouldn't he also think of something to do? It's a blessing, not a curse. It's a curse that cannot be avoided. Carlo still didn't escape this experience. Mother, aren't I busy? The kingdom has just seized a large area of territory from the Ottomans, and there are a lot of things that I need to watch over. You are not alone in the kingdom. Don't those people get married? Don't make excuses for me. Marriage is also your obligation as a king. However, Carlo's defense could not be understood by her mother at all. If she had not had an easy relationship with the little maid before, she would have doubted her eldest son's sexual orientation. But thinking about his eldest son being busy with government affairs all day long, he became even more eager to help him solve his marital problems. Carlo, marriage is not an abyss. There is nothing to be afraid of. If you don't like a girl from home, you can also find a girl from abroad. Although our Savoy family is not very noble, we are still a royal family after all. Faced with his mother's hard advice, Carlo can also understand the other party's intentions. In fact, Carlo himself knew that his marriage must be a political issue. After Nia left before, he had thought it through. The reason why I haven't gotten married is because I have a hurdle in my heart that I can't get over. But now that he saw his mother, who had grey hair, Carlo knew that he couldn't escape this matter. Then, do as you wish, mother. Carlo's resigned answer made Queen Mother Margherita finally smile, and her eldest son agreed. In this case, you need to choose a girl who can match him. In her mind, Queen Mother Margherita has already quickly reviewed the marriageable European royal women, and maybe she can discuss this with the Prime Minister. After all, the king's fiancé also needs the government's help. Emotional drama. I'm too young. Chapter 277. Hello, electromagnetic waves. After Carlo relented, the Italian government also got involved in the king's marriage, and invitation letters were sent to unmarried women from royal families in various countries, among them Germany and Austria. The former Holy Roman Empire, with the largest number of royal families, have the most letters. In fact, this is very easy to understand. On the one hand, Germany and Austria are Italy's current allies, and on the other hand, there are many former Shinra royal families, which are beneficial to Italy and the royal family, both in terms of historical background and practical needs. As for whether these invitations will be rejected, Italy's prosperous performance in recent years and the actual situation of Carlo's power are enough to make people tempted. Besides, Carlo is not bad either. Although he cannot be called an unparalleled beauty, he is considered to be of the upper middle class talent among the young people of various royal families, and his abilities are so outstanding that there is no reason for him to be disliked. Of course, it will take some time to choose a wife for Carlo. After all, the journeys of royal beauties from various countries are different, and the time required is also different. While Italy was busy selecting the king's wife, in the small town of Murano on the outskirts of Rome, a young man was tinkering with one of his gadgets in the famous electrical experiment center. Marconi, I didn't expect you to be ready to start so soon. The speaker was Mr. Tesla, a world-famous electrical master, dean of the Italian Academy of Engineering, specially invited tenured professor at many universities, specially invited scholar of the Italian National Grid, and chief technical expert of Westinghouse Company. Of course, in addition to these eye-catching titles, Tesla also has another title, that is, Marconi's teacher. Yes, after the two met at the Pavia hydropower station, Tesla fell in love with the boy named Marconi very much. Marconi also admired this great scientist who was famous all over the world. As for Marconi's parents, they were naturally very willing to see their son interact with Tesla. The relationship between the two quickly deepened, and it wasn't long before Tesla accepted him as one of his disciples, although Tesla did not have much time to teach Marconi due to time constraints. The teaching of two top people with high IQs was not as cumbersome as others. Therefore, under Tesla's guidance, little Marconi grew rapidly, and he was able to conduct his own experiments in the Quirinal laboratory. Of course, Tesla's face is somewhat involved in this. Speaking of the current Quirinal laboratory, it is considered a famous name in the world. The experiment has achieved a lot of results over the years, and has become the most desirable place for electrical scientists from all over the world. Sufficient funding, top-notch equipment, and a sufficiently relaxed environment are the current impact of Quirinal laboratory on electrical scientists from various countries. Therefore, in recent years, there have been countless electrical scientists who want to work in Quirinal laboratory. Of course, since it is a top laboratory, the talents it needs are also top-notch. The people Quirinal has accepted over the years are all top-notch. The Quirinal laboratory has been able to grow, and its director, Director Argus, deserves the most credit. In the past 10 years, he has worked with many power companies and received a lot of funding from them. The secret is to combine scientific research with practicality, so that companies are willing to invest money in the laboratory. For example, the Italian National Grid Company invested 4.2 million lire in the laboratory last year alone, making it one of the major funders of the laboratory. Don't get me wrong, State Grid was not influenced by anyone, but voluntarily provided it, after having tasted enough sweetness over the years. The State Grid has invested up to 14.91 million lire in Quirinal laboratory, and the various technologies fed back have allowed the company to earn a profit of 35.97 million lire. This investment will not stop anyone with a normal IQ. Speaking of the State Grid, I can mention one more thing here. At present, the Italian State Grid Company is the largest electric power company in Europe. It has a generator set of up to 960,000 kilowatts, accounting for 2/3 of Europe's power generation. At present, the State Grid is still not satisfied. They plan to increase their generating units to the goal of 1.5 million kilowatts. At the same time, we are working with Westinghouse and other companies to expand the power of generators and reduce coal consumption. With the continued development of enterprises such as State Grid, the use of Italian electricity will surely rise to a new level. Of course, this is all for the future. Tesla is currently more concerned about the conditions of his disciples' experiments that to currently have a crude instrument, exposed wires, and an obviously modified wired transmitter. The biggest difference from a wired transmitter is its long antenna that no one can ignore. Tesla looked at the machine in front of him, looked around, and suddenly asked his disciple in a low voice, "Marconi, have you done secret experiments before?" Facing his teacher's sudden inquiry, Marconi shook his head. Seeing the honest disciple, Tesla smiled and patted him on the shoulder to encourage him, and then asked, "Electromagnetic wave communication will be a great innovation if it succeeds. How sure are you of this, teacher?" "I'm quite sure. I have been very interested in electromagnetic waves since Hertz discovered them 4 years ago. I know this. You pestered me all day long just to understand the situation of electromagnetic waves. I was too busy to notice it at the time, so I explained it to you while watching, but..." The teacher explained it very thoroughly and gave me a thorough understanding of electromagnetic waves. The two chatted about the situation of electromagnetic waves. In fact, European countries have not yet discovered the practicality of electromagnetic waves, which were newly discovered only a few years ago, and they are only limited to understanding them. Speaking of the discovery of electromagnetic waves, in addition to Hertz, there was another person, the British physicist Maxwell. He proposed the phenomenon of electric field induction in the 1960s, but due to his early death, he failed to discover electromagnetic waves, leaving this opportunity to Hertz. As for the practicality of electromagnetic waves now, the younger Marconi plans to give it a try. The conversation was terminated after other staff members had checked the lines and equipment. Now, The instrument has been checked, and the experiment can be carried out. After receiving the notice from the staff, Marconi showed an excited expression. After all, this was his first experiment, based on his own ideas, so how could he not be excited? Tesla on the side looked at the disciple's excited expression and patted him. Marconi, go ahead, this is your experiment. After receiving encouragement from his teacher, Marconi moved towards the simple instrument. Although this instrument was very simple, it was also the hard work of him and his teacher walking to the transmitting equipment. He used moral code to send the telegram that would affect the world in the future. A few minutes later, a staff member ran in with a more code message. Tesla took the message, which was the world's first wireless telegram sent by Marconi. Hello, electromagnetic waves, we made it. Marconi, who also saw the telegram, jumped up excitedly. Tesla looked at his disciple with a smile on his face. Yes, it worked, and like the young Marconi, Tesla, as a top electrician, knew what the success of this experiment meant. In the future, electronic communications will no longer rely on telegraph lines, so the development potential is simply unlimited. And all of this was done by his disciple, who was not yet 17 years old. At this moment, he was proud of Marconi. Chapter 278 Mary Annunziata. The invention of radio had a great impact on the development of the world, but this is all a matter for the future. Currently, only a few people who participated in the Marconi experiment know about this, but these people have been warned by Tesla not to tell anyone. Because he knows how practical this technology is. This technology can be temporarily concealed until it becomes practical. As for how long it can be hidden, I can only say as much as possible. Tesla's current worries are somewhat overblown, because the royal ball is about to begin, and almost all eyes are currently attracted to this feast. Mariah, do I look good like this? In a room in the Quirinal Palace, a girl dressed in a flashy dress asked another girl next to her. Very nice. Looks good. The girl who spoke was also dressed beautifully, watching her sister still looking left and right in front of the mirror, trying to make herself more perfect. I feel like this necklace doesn't match. Mariah, give me the pearl necklace to try on. Okay, sister. Mariah took out a beautiful pearl necklace from the jewelry box. The snow white pearls shone on her white and tender neck, which finally satisfied Margaret. Looks better. Seeing her sister Margaret's satisfied expression, Mariah felt that it was a mistake to come to see the world with her sister this time. Both are the daughters of Archduke Karl Ludwig, but compared to her sister Margaret, Mariah is much younger. She is only 15 years old this year, and this time she was brought to see her by her sister world. One more thing to say here is that Archduke Ferdinand, the current Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary, is also the elder brother of the two. Of course, these two Grand Duchesses were not the only ones attending the ball this time. Beauties from all over the world were also making their own preparations in the evening. The Quirinal Palace was brightly lit, and the bright electric lights illuminated the entire palace. The palace guards even put on brand new uniforms, showing off their heroic demeanor in high spirits. Everyone knows that today's palace is of great significance, so the guests are all dressed up to attend. Of course, they also know that they are not the protagonists, but the king and the beauties from all over the world. As representatives of the Habsburg family, Margaret and Mariah also entered the ball together. It seems that Italy is not as poor as family said, right? Mariah, the youngest daughter of Archduke Ludwig, muttered quietly after looking around. This is organized by the Savoy family after all. Although it is not as good as our Habsburg family, it can't be too different. Margaret, the sister with sensitive hearing, then whispered to her sister to explain. Although Margaret was explaining, her strong sense of superiority could not be changed. Yes, as a member of the Habsburg family, Margaret was full of pride in her family. The Habsburgs are a wealthy and aristocratic family with a long history. If it were 100 or 200 years ago, girls from the Habsburg family would always be the most sought after by the kings and nobles. The Romanov family are all barbarians, and the Savoy family was also a minor noble before. As for the French Bourbon, Capet, Saxon Wettin, Bavaria Wittelsbach and other families, they are far from comparable to the Habsburg family. Although the Habsburg family is no longer what it used to be, it is still one of the top 3 families in Europe. except for the Hohenzollern family of Prussia and the Hanover family of the British Empire. Other families simply cannot be compared with it. In a way, European nobles are similar to Eastern families, in that they evaluate family status in various aspects. What a glorious history, current power, and enough fame, etc. Of course, these are all compared to famous families. The support behind them are empires, kingdoms, and again grand duchies. Only with such national support can the nobles compete in various ways. These are all matters for the big nobles, and things are much worse for the small nobles who are not the big nobles. In this era, the life of the small nobles is much more difficult. It is not news that many small nobles have bankrupted their families, just for the sake of dignity. As for the guests attending the ball, there is no such pressure. Hello, my name is Margaret, from Vienna. Hello, my name is Grace, I'm from France. After a conversation, the two separated amicably and intimately. When Margaret turned around, she felt as uncomfortable as if she had eaten a fly. Damn, I didn't expect him to be a bumpkin from Corsica. Yes, the girl named Grace has a Bonaparte prefix. However, the Bonaparte family, which works well in France, does not work well in Europe. Everyone knows that the Bonaparte family started with Napoleon. Although it was only 20 years since the fall of Napoleon III, the Bonaparte family is less than 100 years old now. It is not even ranked in Europe. Whatever. Take a family, and it has a long history of hundreds of years compared with the Habsburg family, which has a glorious history. The Bonaparte family does not even bother to carry shoes, and can only be called an upstart. This was one of the reasons why Margaret felt uncomfortable. She didn't expect that the first person she met was a Corsican Navorish. In some respects, Margaret represents the current situation of most European aristocrats. To be honest, they are very realistic, and to be honest, they are also very hypocritical. Even if she doesn't want to get along with the girl from the Bonaparte family, she will not show it at all, but will be very enthusiastic. In addition to this girl from the Bonaparte family, Margaret's subsequent communication was very good. She met many girls from other countries, and made many friends who she thought she could meet. Although everyone knows the purpose of the other parties coming here, no one will put the competition in the open. But when she returned to her sister after some socializing, she immediately vented her dissatisfaction. Maria, are you here just to eat? Faced with her sister's greedy look, Margaret didn't know what to say. Although she looks like an angel, she behaves with no aristocratic etiquette at all, just like a common girl. But I'm hungry. You only asked the servant to bring some vegetables at noon today, which is not enough to eat. Maria, with some food residue still stuck to her face, casually explained the reason to her sister. It was okay that Maria didn't explain. Once she heard her sister's explanation, Margaret almost wanted to give it to herself. How could I have thought of bringing Maria to see the world at that time? I would have known better to bring my sister Elizabeth here. Although this youngest sister is only 13 years old, she is much better than Maria, who is 15 but still confused. Although she wanted to pretend that she didn't know her, after all, they were here together. Margaret could only step forward to tidy up her sister, and pulled her reluctantly away from the dining table. And some people paying attention to the table smiled knowingly. Just as she was telling her sister, a loud shout attracted everyone's attention. Dear Queen Margherita and King Carlo are here. As the announcement fell, Queen Mother Margherita entered the scene with Carlo. With the arrival of the protagonist, the dance scene immediately became quiet. Carlo was a little helpless today. He was forced to dress up. Although the retro white military uniform made him handsome and upright, he always felt awkward, especially his neck, which was a bit strangling, but he had to smile. You are very glad that you are here to attend this dance. After Queen Mother Margherita made a brief speech, beautiful music sounded, indicating that the dance had begun. Many people present dance to the music, adding to the dance atmosphere. Although most people are dancing, there are still many people sitting here waiting like ladies, and most of them are unmarried girls. The purpose is very clear. They are waiting. Of course, what they are waiting for is that as the protagonist this time, Carlo will choose his dance partner. The main purpose of this dance is also for him. As the center of attention. Carlo also knew the importance of his invitation to the first dance point, so he kept patrolling among the beauties from all over the world, and these girls tried to show their good side when facing the king's gaze. Carlo's eyes were immediately attracted by a figure. Unlike other aristocratic girls, this pretty girl sat on the chair and looked around, as if she didn't take the purpose of the ball to heart at all. Seeing Carlo's eyes lingering there, the captain of the guard at the side whispered, "Your Majesty, this is Archduchess Maria from the Habsburg family. Next to her is her sister Margaret." "I see." Then Carlo stood up and walked towards him. When many girls saw that Carlo was not walking towards them, a hint of darkness flashed in their eyes. "Coming towards me, I want to be more dignified." Margaret felt a burst of joy in her heart when she saw Carlo walking towards them. Although she was born into the Habsburg family, who wouldn't want to be a queen? Besides, this Carlo is not bad looking and would be a perfect husband. Margaret was very clear about her identity. Even though she lived a colorful life and had no worries about food and clothing, few daughters of nobles could pursue their own happiness. The word marriage was basically created for aristocratic girls, let alone the Habsburg family, which relied on marriage to grow stronger. So it would be great to be able to choose a handsome king as your marriage partner, but immediately she was stunned. The handsome king walked up to them, stretched out his right hand and said, "Would you be honored to invite me to a dance?" He is inviting his sister who has no aristocratic etiquette at all. What's going on? As for Maria, who was despised by her sister, she was a little overwhelmed by suddenly becoming the center of attention. Having never seen such a scene before, she naturally turned to her sister for help. "Margaret, what should I do?" For the record, I'm not a copper smelter, I'm very normal. Chapter 279. Queen Maria. The news that the king had chosen his wife spread very quickly in Italy. In less than 3 days, everyone knew that a Habsburg girl named Maria Annunziata would become their queen. Although some people have some objections to this, the reason is simple. Italy and Austria were not doing well a few years ago. But for the absolute majority of people, they are very happy to see results. This is just a domestic attitude. It is even more different abroad. Most of the country was surprised that the king of Italy chose a Habsburg girl as his wife. Because everyone knows the relationship between Italy and Austria-Hungary. The two countries had constant disputes before. Although they have gotten better in recent years, it is not an exaggeration to say that the relationship is normal. Why did Italy suddenly choose to marry Austria-Hungary? European countries do not know the Treaty of the Three Emperors Alliance. Countries all have their own speculations about this, but no matter what the guesses are, this will more or less change the diplomatic situation in Europe. After all, the union of the Italian and Austrian royal families is a big event for Europe. Of course, while countries are evaluating this marriage, they are also evaluating the impact on their own countries. Generally speaking, there are many countries that can benefit from this marriage, such as Germany, which leads the alliance of three emperors, Bulgaria, which is leaning towards the two countries, and Romania, which has signed a defense treaty with Germany and Austria. However, if there are countries that benefit, there will naturally be countries that suffer losses. For example, France, Russia, Serbia, and Greece in the Balkans, and other involved countries are not satisfied with the marriage between Italy and Austria. If you look closely, you will find that these countries whose interests have been harmed are basically along the Mediterranean coast, or the countries in the Balkans. Needless to say about France, the marriage between Italy and Austria-Hungary will inevitably lead to the resolution or suppression of conflicts between the two countries. Apart from Austria-Hungary, Italy's biggest foreign dispute is France, not to mention the territorial dispute between the two countries in the Alps. It was the Tunisia crisis 10 years ago that made the contradiction between the two countries irreconcilable. Now that the relationship between Italy and Austria-Hungary has taken a further step, it is naturally not a good thing for France. Russia's situation is somewhat similar to France's, but also somewhat different. The marriage between Italy and Austria will reduce Russia's influence in the Balkans, which is gradually weakening. This is something Russia does not want to see. However, although Russia had no reason to see it, there was nothing that could be done about the marriage between Italy and Austria. Because they, like France, cannot affect the marriage between the two countries. As for Italy, although many people have doubts, they will not object to the future queen coming from the Habsburg family. In Vienna, discussions were also ongoing regarding the choice of a Habsburg girl by King Carlo of Italy. I never expected that this young man from a neighboring country would choose Maria in the Hofburg Palace as the father of the person involved. Archdeacon Ludwig was discussing what happened in Rome with his brother, Emperor Joseph I of Austria-Hungary. Maria's father is not a simple one. Her eldest son, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is currently the crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the 4-year-old eldest son of his second son, Archduke Otto Franz, is the future last emperor of Austria-Hungary, Carol. A generation. It can be said that the natal family of the wife Carlo chose was very influential in Austria-Hungary. I never thought of that either. The person speaking was Joseph I, the founder of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In fact, he was very happy with Carlo's choice of the Habsburg family as his marriage partner. If nothing else, just because his successor, Archduke Ferdinand, is his uncle, he can at least ensure peace between the two countries for 20 years, which is also very beneficial to Austria-Hungary. Although the King of Italy was 10 years older than Maria, it didn't matter. The age gap between spouses of European nobles is often more than 10 or 20 years, so Carlo's age is considered appropriate. So, it's decided like this, although Joseph I said it as if he was soliciting his brother's favor. After having been together for so many years, how could Archduke Ludwig not know what his brother meant? Such things that were beneficial to the Habsburg family did not need to be considered at all. Marriage was a Habsburg tradition, and the matter was not negotiable. As for Maria's own attitude, it doesn't matter. As long as they have discussed it, it will be passed. I think it works. So, during the discussion between the two, the preliminary decision was made on the marriage with Italy. Maria and her sister Margaret, who were completely unaware of this, got on the train back to Vienna. Different from when I came here, I took 2 additional floats. When I returned to Vienna, the bedroom, living room and kitchen are fully equipped, and there are dedicated servants and cooks to serve the 2 of them. Everything is prepared according to the royal family's trip. This was shocking enough for the 2 Habsburg girls. You must know that they usually travel in a box, and only with their father are they in a float. In Austria-Hungary, only Uncle Joseph's family rides in 2 carriages. And now the 2 of them are riding on 2 floats, which is self-evident. Margaret knew that all this came from her sister being favored by the King of Italy, and she felt depressed when she thought about it. There is something about my sister that looks like an aristocratic lady. Unexpectedly, the King of Italy liked this. Yes, Margaret had analyzed the reasons for her failure, but that was only hindsight. The results have come out, and there is no point in regretting. I can only watch my still stupid sister become the Queen of Italy. Margaret, these 2 carriages are ours to use. That's right. Looking at my surprised sister, I couldn't describe it as silly. Not reserved at all, just yelling. But his sister is really lucky. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but care about another thing, his sister's feelings. Maria, what do you think of King Carlo? After hearing her sister's words, Maria thought for a while and spoke with a serious expression on her face. Carlo, I feel like he is as stable as the eldest brother, but he is much funnier than the eldest brother. Am I asking this? It's simply a bullshit. This was the main reason why she thought her sister was stupid. Whatever she asked, she might get wrong answers, unless she made it very clear. Not mentioning the topic of the 2 Habsburg Grand Duchess. Less than half a month after the 2 returned to Vienna, the Savoy family formally requested a marriage to the Habsburg family. Joseph I, the patriarch of the Habsburg family, naturally agreed. During this period, the 2 royal families naturally had many private communications, but one wanted to marry, and the other wanted to marry, so the private communications went very smoothly. Later, his uncle Amedia, Duke of Aosta, led a team to Vienna to discuss the wedding of the 2 young people. Of course, in addition to the 2 major families, the government also has representatives. Talking to the Austrian government, they are all work at the government level. They are mainly about issues of goodwill and friendship between the 2 countries. They can also be regarded as contributing to the marriage of the two major families 3 months later. A grand wedding that attracted European attention was held in Rome. Nearly 1 million people and representatives from various countries attended the marriage point. When Carlo kissed Maria, the whole wedding scene burst into cheers. As a mother, Queen Mother Margherita even shed tears of happiness. Now that both sons are married, the next step is to wait for the addition of a child to the family point with this grand marriage. Carlo also said goodbye to being single. Everything is so beautiful. Chapter 280 Subterranean Mine, Part 1. Carlo's wedding is a big event in Italy. As the governor of Libya, Howard Georgi was naturally very happy, but compared with several other governors, he did not go to Rome to attend the wedding in person, and he was also the only one with the governor of Borneo, Antonio. The governor did not attend the wedding point, unlike Antonio, who is too far away. Howard Georgi's Libya is only separated by the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, there are enough reasons for him not to participate. A new round of cleanup work in Libya is in full swing. As one of the main planners, Governor Georgi simply cannot leave point. This cleanup operation can be regarded as the third cleanup operation in Libya. Moreover, Governor Quirinal was also very ambitious in this purge operation. He plans to reduce the number of local tribes in Libya to 10% in this operation, which means that more than 200,000 tribal people will be driven out this time point, deducting the nearly 100,000 people already captured in the first and second sweeps. This means that the Italian army needs to capture at least 100,000 people in this sweep point. It seems that this cleanup task is very heavy, more than the previous two cleanups combined, and it seems difficult to complete. In fact, according to Governor George's estimation, it may seem difficult, but in fact it is not too difficult point. Although this cleanup operation is demanding, and the tribes are extremely vigilant after the previous two operations, Quirinal still has a way to find them. Perhaps it is more appropriate not to find out, but to force it out point. Although the harsh environment of dryness and lack of rain poses great difficulties for the development of Villa, it can currently become its ally point during the two campaigns. The Libyan Governor General has mapped water sources in the entire region. In the two consecutive clearing operations, the Arab nomadic tribes did not have enough time to raise livestock. Now, as long as they guard the medium and large water sources and leave mobile troops, they are not afraid that those tribes will not come out unless they want to give up all their livestock. Starving to death. We won't survive next year, of course, just for this alone. Other costs such as time and personnel are not low, but in any case, although Italy's national strength is far behind that of other powers, it has no problem at all in dealing with the small Libyan region point. In addition, as Italy's cleanup operation in the Balkans comes to an end, its support for the Libyan region is increasing. At present, Governor George has nearly 3 cavalry divisions and 2 infantry regiments with a total strength of 26,000. It needs to be explained here that an Italian cavalry division has 3 to 4 cavalry regiments. The cavalry regiments adopt a small regiment and large company system. Each regiment has 4 to 6 cavalry companies, plus the machine gun company. The strength of a cavalry regiment is between 1,000 and 1,000, between 1,400 people. The strength of an Italian cavalry division fluctuates between 4,000 and 6,000, mainly based on the needs of the garrison point. The clearing operation mainly relied on cavalry troops, while the infantry of the 2 regiments were responsible for guarding key points in the city point. Governor Georgi also put a lot of effort into this clearing operation. He and General Brennan worked together to improve the problems that occurred in the previous 2 operations. At the same time, the gradually improving map was also used to clear up those tribes around the grassland and water sources. In this cleanup, Governor Quirinal divided his troops into 4 groups. In addition, there were 3 advance teams that went deep into the vast desert, intending to find the hiding Arab tribe. Sabha is located east of the Aberi Desert, more than 500 kilometers away from the coastline. It is considered an extremely inland city. In addition, it is one of the driest areas in the world. However, although there is no rain here all year round, the Aberi oasis formed by relying on groundwater makes it a stop for travelers and caravans crossing the desert. They replenish food and water here for the next leg of their journey. Therefore, although Sabha is located in the desert, it is also a city that relies on trade for its livelihood. Point of course, like other desert cities, Sabha Key has a small population, with only more than 4,000 people. Most of them are Berbers. However, a big event happened in Sabha a few days ago. An Italian army entered Sabha. They dissolved the Council of Elders and declared that Sabha was now under the jurisdiction of the Governor General of Libya, and local residents must pay taxes to the governor. Facing the ferocious Italians, the local residents could not resist at all and could only accept it silently. Nearly 500 fully armed Italian cavalry were no match for the small Sabha residents. And these people not only had guns, they also toted 4 cannons. The power of this cannon is staggering, and the city walls of Sabha cannot withstand the bombardment of this cannon. In fact, the cavalry that broke into Sabha was one of the 3 advance teams sent by Governor Giorgi. Since the commander of the team was Major Carlson, it was also called Carlson's advance team. They came to Sabha, not only because it is a transportation hub in the Sahara Desert, but also because the Aberi oasis can support the lives of 4 to 5,000 people. They planned to come to see if there were any Arab tribesmen hiding in the area. As for the Berbers living in the desert, they are not included in the purge. The main reason is that the desert is too barren, and these Berbers are very few, with a total of only 10 or 20,000, and they are also relatively sensible. Dare not offend the majesty of Italy at all. So let these Berbers live here, as long as they are willing to surrender to the government and pay taxes. This is not because the government is interested in their camels and dates. Only by collecting taxes can we see whether the region is truly willing to surrender. As the captain of Carlson's advance team, Major Jan Carlson had tried this method in several oases before, and the Berbers paid taxes to them. Of course, Carlson is also measured, and the taxes he requires are basically not too much. They are basically stuck at the point where the other party can pay, but will not feel any pain. After all, these Berbers who have been living in the desert are very useful to them, but they can't lose the big for the small. So these days the advance team has been keeping their peace. Not to mention the criminals. There was no counter offer even when buying things, because Carlson had warned his team members that if he did anything excessive to the Berbers, he would do it in accordance with military law. There is no choice under the military law during wartime. It is either to shoot or to be sentenced. No one wants to test the law personally. Therefore, in the face of strict military law, everyone will think twice before doing anything. In the temporary headquarters of Sabha, Carlson was looking at the map and he needed to consider his next move. However, his actions were quickly disturbed. "Sir," Lieutenant Steele outside the door said, "he has something urgent to ask you." The guard's report made Carlson look up. He knew who this Lieutenant Steele was. He was one of the 4 cadets assigned to the regiment last year. He seemed to have studied geological prospecting and became an officer because of the war call. "What is the matter with you this time, or is it an emergency? Call him in." In the end, Carlson asked the guards to call Lieutenant Steele in. After all, he needed to know what was making the lieutenant so anxious. After receiving permission, Lieutenant Steele walked in excitedly with a dark red stone. "Major, look what I found here, Lieutenant." Steele placed the dark red stone in his hand in front of Carlson, as if announcing good news. Chapter 281 Sabha Iron Mine, Part 2. The Shati River, located 50 kilometers north of Sabha, is an ancient river that has dried up long ago. However, because no underground water source has been found here, no one lives here at all. The gravel and sand all over the ground is what this place is now. There is not even a trace of dead wood here, and it is a place where birds do not poop. Only the stones of various colors make this place different from other places. But in today's Shati River, the situation has become somewhat different. Dozens of riders show up here. The leader was Major Carlson, and beside him Lieutenant Steele was telling him something. I was shocked when I saw it. This is definitely the most spectacular sight I have ever seen. As you can imagine, iron ore is scattered everywhere and exposed like this. This scene is so charming, no matter how you look at it. I believe the kingdom will give us enough honor and reward for this. Well, this last sentence should be his true voice. But for Carlson, he had never studied geology, so he could not understand Lieutenant Steele's mood at that time. But he knew that what he saw today must be very beneficial to him. However, in order to confirm, He followed Lieutenant Steele here to confirm. Lieutenant, are you saying there is iron ore here? Yes, I'm sure. After receiving confirmation, Carlson continued to ask, so how big do you think it will be? I cannot confirm this due to lack of tools and time, but I believe it should not be lower, at least tens of millions of tons. Right. At the end of the day, Lieutenant Steele felt a little weak. It's not that he didn't dare to say more, but that the knowledge he learned was learned, but he didn't put it into practice. Let's talk about geology. In this era, there is a bit of metaphysics. Maybe what you see in front of you is the entire amount of iron ore, or there may be more iron ore hidden underneath. But no matter what, there will definitely be no shortage of iron ore. 10 million tons is a low number. Of course, if the government is interested, it can send a more professional exploration team to conduct a careful exploration point, and according to his preliminary investigation, the iron content of the iron ore here is not low, and should be between 35% and 55%, which is enough to meet the needs of most of Italy's steel industry. Of course, it was not up to him, a young lieutenant who discovered iron ore, to decide exactly what to do. And there is another very troublesome problem here, that is, it is 500 kilometers away from the Libyan coastline, and the poor water resources here are also not conducive to large-scale mining. But let the government figure out what to do. For him, reporting his findings to the superiors was the limit of what he could do. Carlson also had the same idea. Of course, after seeing Lieutenant Steele's explanation at the same time, he felt that he might be able to do more. Looking at the exposed iron ore in front of him, Carlson immediately spoke. Lieutenant Steele, now that you have discovered this iron mine, I have an idea. Having said this, Carlson looked at Lieutenant Steele in front of him. Sir, please give the order. The lieutenant, who still didn't understand, could only agree first. Very. But I want you to stay here and continue to explore the scale and quality of this iron ore. In addition, I will find the equipment and manpower you need as soon as possible. It was obvious that Carlson planned to keep him to continue exploring the iron mine and send personnel from home to lay the foundation first. Of course, there was a reason for him to do this. As a mid-level officer, Carlson knew that the kingdom was currently hungry for various minerals, especially iron ore, so he had a bold idea. As commanded, Major, I will write down the equipment I need and let you know. Although he was left behind, Lieutenant Steele had already prepared for this, so he agreed to the major's order to then stay here for a while, and by the afternoon Carlson had returned to Sabha Point. As soon as he returned to his headquarters, Carlson immediately began to write a letter. He wanted to report to his superiors the news of the discovery of iron ore in Sabha. Dear General Brennan, my advance team has arrived in Sabha. After first telling a recent story about the advance team, he then told about the discovery of iron ore in Sabha Point. However, when writing the estimated reserves, Carlson paused, and then in the submitted document, he estimated the iron ore reserves to be between 50 million and 100 million tons. Yes, this is Carlson's bold idea. Because if you write according to what Lieutenant Steele said, 10 million tons may seem okay, but considering the location and environment, it is unlikely to attract attention, even if it is written as 30 to 50 million tons. The same is true. The main reason is that it is too desolate and too far away from the coastline, which will make its development more difficult. Even if this is an open pit iron mine, the cost of development and transportation still needs to be considered. If you want the government to pay attention to this place, its reserves must not be small. Only a large iron ore with over 100 million tons will attract enough attention. And Carlson, who found this mine, naturally deserves huge credit, although there were risks involved. After all, when a more professional exploration team came, everything became clear. However, as Lieutenant Steele said, the scale of this iron ore can only be estimated now. Even if there is a gap by then, estimation errors can be used to deal with it. However, compared with the benefits after success, the risk is not high. At most, you will be reprimanded, but you can also use yourself to serve the country as a way to deal with it. After making up his mind, Carlson finished writing the letter and called a messenger to hand it to him. Arrange a squad of troops to deliver the letter to Tripoli, as you command, Your Majesty. Major. After the messenger leaves, Carlson needs to consider the next goal of the advance team. Sabha, where they are currently located, is not their final destination. Next, they will follow the ancient trade route through the Merzuk Desert and head to its south. It is even more barren, but there are Zamaswel, Mushilujing and others serve as a place to stay point of course. This also requires a guide who is proficient in the area, and Carlson and the others brought such a guide point. However, considering the safety of the back road and the supply problems along the way, he only planned to bring more than 200 cavalry this time. Because according to the guide, the population there is even sparser, and a place where 1,000 people can gather is considered a big place. Carlson's report appeared on Governor George's desk more than half a month later. The discovery of hundreds of millions of tons of iron ore was enough for him to take it very seriously. However, he had no way to decide on such a major event, and could only board a communication ship to Rome 2 days later. After nearly a month of transmission, it finally appeared in front of the Prime Minister for Prime Minister Depretis. Since there are hundreds of millions of tons of large iron ore, there must be a professional exploration team. As for the rest of the decision, we must wait for professionals to investigate clearly before making it. Chapter 280 to Borneo Expedition. Pontianak is currently the most prosperous city in Borneo. After several years of development, the city is also very modern. Point of course, as it is most developed city in the region, Pontianak is also the place with the largest number of Italians. The various commercial houses in the city as well as the shipyards and other factories at the port have accumulated too much population. According to government statistics, there are more than 50,000 Italians in Pontianak, while there are only about 200,000 in the entire Borneo. This also shows how much Italy likes this city. The bar in the port area is the favorite place for Italians at the bottom. Crew members, workers, and adventurers all like to come here to have a drink. If they have nothing to do, they can even flirt with the waitress for a few words, so that their fatigue can be swept away. Bowl's bar is also located in the port area, and is similar to other bars, but the bar is run by a retired explorer, so many explorers like to come here for a drink or two. Simon pushed open the bar door, glanced at the people in the bar and stepped in. Simon, long time no see. The bar owner Bol saw him coming in and immediately said hello. Bol, the old rules. A glass of whiskey on the rocks was placed in front of Simon. How is it? I heard that you went to the east again. Did you gain anything? After passing the wine to Simon, Bol, as the boss, asked, what's the harvest? The Dutch are chasing us everywhere. I heard that 2 of the past expeditions have been caught by the Dutch and everyone has been detained. Now I have made money, I really don't want to suffer this crime anymore. This is really bad news. If even you, the most experienced explorer, don't want to go east again, then everyone else can imagine. I can't control other people. Anyway, I have gained enough. I want to open a bar like you in my later years, but I don't want to die in a smelly ditch somewhere in the rainforest. After finishing the glass, Simon looked at old Bol who was adding wine to himself. Bol, is there any interesting news during my absence? Yes, said old Bol, who filled the glass and put down the bottle. Do you remember that Cruz who liked to wear enchantments? I remember him. I even bought him 2 drinks last year. I remember that before I left, he was studying mysterious Eastern metaphysics. Of course Simon knew about this guy who liked to talk about gods and promoted that he got guidance from the universe. They all treated him as a joke. Now that guy is rich. Someone asked him to form an expedition team before they discovered a gold mine in the primitive jungle 80 kilometers east of Puerto Cabello upstream. Now many people have gone there. Hearing this, Simon suddenly asked, how are the casualties? Of course, old Bohr knew what Simon was asking. It was normal for the expedition team to suffer casualties. In the inaccessible rainforest, primitive people, beasts, and diseases will kill these strong team members. Every adventure is a life-threatening journey, and any mistake in a small detail is enough to prevent them from leaving the rainforest. I heard that 8 people died, and only 11 people are left. Cruz is fine. After hearing Bol's story, Simon said something meaningful. Oh, if this guy is lucky, he will become a rich man. What does Simon mean by this? This is actually a piece of advice. The well-informed Simon knew how tempting the gold mine was to people. It can be said that adventurers like the most hope to find a gold mine, and the last thing they want to do is to find a gold mine. The gold mines in Borneo are different from other places. There are no large gold mines. They are basically small gold mines. There is very little news that medium-sized gold mines have been discovered. Simon has been in Borneo for several years and has only heard of it once. As soon as the gold mine was discovered, it was acquired by the Borneo Mining Company. News about small gold mines comes out every year. It is precisely because of this that Simon knows how bloody the mining of small gold mines, which the government looks down upon, can be. It can be said that only 1/3 of those lucky people who discovered gold mines were able to return home with wealth after receiving their generous rewards. Another third returned to the past due to various reasons after suddenly becoming rich, and another third died suddenly in the gold mine they discovered. As for why it's so bad, it's because the small gold mines discovered are basically deep in inaccessible rainforests, and the conditions are extremely harsh to survive until now. In such an inaccessible place, the government is simply beyond its reach, so it is basically the law of the jungle, and the risk factor is very high. So this is a blessing for Simon, and I hope the lucky crews can resist the temptation of gold and escape unscathed. After a few more drinks, Simon continued to understand some things and left the bar in a slightly drunk state. Wandering all the way to his residence, he was about to open the door when he heard someone calling him from behind. "Sir." "Simon, please wait a moment." Upon hearing this, Simon immediately returned to his sober state, because none of his friends and acquaintances would call him Your Excellency, and someone with this title must be an official figure. Sure enough, he turned around and saw a well-dressed middle-aged man walking over from the bench in the aisle. It seemed that he had been waiting for him for a long time. "Hello, do you have any advice?" Looking at the middle-aged man who appeared in front of him, Simon was even more sure that he didn't recognize him. Seeing Simon's doubts, the visitor spoke. "Please don't mind interrupting me. Mr. Simon, won't you invite me in to sit down, please? Come in." After the two entered the house, Simon looked at each other and asked with some fear, "Your Excellency, before expressing your intention of coming, please introduce yourself." Facing Simon's words, the visitor smiled slightly. "Then you can call Mr. Tony. As for my purpose of coming, I simply need your expertise. I know that Sir Simon is one of the few explorers in Borneo, so I hope to hire you to form a professional expedition team. Remuneration, it's easy to negotiate. As long as it's not outrageous, I can accept it." As soon as Simon heard the other party's introduction, he knew that things were not simple, because he had a feeling that Tony was the name. The other party said casually. As for hiring himself to explore, to be honest, he didn't want to agree. "Then, can I refuse?" Faced with Simon's answer, the visitor looked at him and said with a smile, "What do you think?" Simon sighed after hearing the visitor's answer. "Since I can't refuse, can you give me a hint? At least let me know who to work for. You know that I'm timid and afraid of accidents. Otherwise, I can't do this, even if it costs my life." As soon as he finished speaking, Simon stared at the visitor and waited for his reply. Facing the stubborn Simon, Tony was finally defeated. After all, a person who is no longer afraid of death has nothing to use as a threat. "Well, since you want to know, I'll tell you, but it's best to keep this news in your stomach, otherwise you will be in big trouble." The visitor named Tony said, after sorting out his language, "This expedition comes from a big man, an absolutely big man with hands and eyes in Borneo, and this mission you take a team of people to go somewhere. This is what I can say. Don't be curious anymore, otherwise it will do you no good at all, even if you are not afraid of death." After hearing Tony's answer, Simon was finally able to be sure of one thing. It was good that his expedition was not a one-time consumable. In an expedition, the most feared thing is the mysterious guest who uses their expedition team as a disposable consumable. So despite the beautiful appearance of their explorers, the actual danger is very high. If you don't pay attention, you may get stuck somewhere. How much time do I have to prepare? Now that he knew the situation, Simon was quite free and easy and asked the time directly. "You have 10 days to prepare. When the time comes, we will meet at the Key Hotel in the west of the city." As he spoke. The visitor Tony took out a money bag and placed it on the table. "This is your reward this time. Remember not to be late." Then the visitor Tony left his room, leaving Simon alone. Of course Simon knew what the other party's move of paying him in advance meant. The other party was not afraid of him fleeing with the money. Combined with the phrase "big shot," it was obvious that he was working for the colonial government. But what it was, it had to be done in private. Simon didn't care at all. Curiosity killed the cat is a famous saying in Europe. Chapter 283 Antonio's Little Thoughts. The Governor's Palace in Pontianak is definitely the most eye-catching landmark building in the city. Of course, what is even more eye-catching is that the key is that the governor who governs the entire Italian Borneo lives here. As the governor of Borneo, Antonio is definitely the center of attention. In just a few months, this governor has left his mark on Borneo. Colonial officials and local powerful people all learned about Antonio's new governor's methods. Everyone knew that this new governor was not someone to mess with, and they were all treated obediently. However, monopolizing power in the Borneo colony was not Antonio's main goal. You must know that, before coming to Borneo, he had his own goals. In the future, entering Rome and becoming an important minister is the minimum expectation, and becoming the head of the government is the highest goal. Yes, a soldier who doesn't want to be a general is not a good soldier. This sentence also applies to Antonio. For Antonio, Borneo's economy has been properly arranged by the former prime minister, and he can achieve results as long as he follows the steps. But Antonio is also a proud man, and he is unwilling to take credit for the achievements of the former prime minister. Among them, some of these achievements are not eye-catching, because he is not an economic expert, and the development of Borneo will not be faster than before. In this case, Antonio needs to make a breakthrough from elsewhere. What he is most optimistic about is a breakthrough in Dutch Borneo, and he already has some ideas about this. "Governor, I have already arranged the manpower for what you ordered." Tony from before came to Antonio respectfully and reported in a low voice. It seemed that Simon's prediction was correct. Tony was indeed not afraid of him taking the money and running away. Then, "Let's make arrangements first." After hearing Tony's answer, Antonio put down the information in his hands. "This is nothing. It is just the exploration data of the expedition team in Dutch Borneo over the years. Even though the Netherlands has strengthened its military deployment in Borneo in recent years, the vast land is full of loopholes, and there are many opportunities to get through, not to mention various expedition teams that are good at this." According to the report of the governor of Jakarta, the number of Italian Borneo expedition teams they have captured has increased day by day in recent years, from 4 or 5 at the beginning to more than 20 now. These well-equipped expedition teams are wandering around Dutch Borneo. They explored the resources of Dutch Borneo and purchased various commodities from local people, including gold, spices, ivory, rare animals, etc., which seriously affected the Dutch rule in the area. Of course, this is a report to Amsterdam. As for private estimates by local Dutch officials, it is possible that the number of Italian expeditions entering the country illegally would be 10 times higher than the number of arrests. Moreover, this would be less convenient. Estimated. In fact, there is nothing we can do about it. The Dutch are just businessmen when it comes to colonization. They only exploited the colonies and did not consider the feelings of the local people at all. It can be said that when the Dutch purchased colonial goods, they were considered conscientious enough to pay 10% of the selling price. Many times, they are purchased directly for $0 in the name of taxation. Otherwise, why would the officials of the Dutch colonies have to borrow debt from their posts? Take the governor of Jakarta as an example. Basically, every governor takes office with debts of millions of guilders. They have to not only pay off the debts in 3 or 4 years, but also accumulate millions of wealth. The colonies were plundered and plundered, but nothing could be done. Let me just say that the governor of Jakarta will not last long. He will basically need to leave office in 3 or 4 years, because there are people who are eager to make a fortune waiting for him. Therefore, the Dutch colonial method based on looting was simply too crude and not at all as smart as the latecomer Italy. At least the Italian colonial government would still do things, while the Dutch would only make money. It was precisely because of his disdain for the Dutch approach that Antonio set his sights on Dutch Borneo. such a piece of land was left in Dutch hands for nothing. Although this land is not as rich as Borneo, the income will be many times higher if it is developed. Point of course, if you want to get Dutch Borneo, you need to keep causing trouble for the Dutch. In view of the previous agreement signed by the Italian government, he could not go to other parts of the Netherlands to cause trouble, but could only find a solution in Borneo. And the method he prepared was very simple, that is, to cause chaos in Dutch Borneo. The natives of Borneo, who have been oppressed for many years, must have been dissatisfied with the Dutch. If Italy reaches out to help, it is normal for it to jump out and disrupt its order at that time, because the Dutch government's handling of the riot was unfavorable and affected Italian Borneo. Antonio, as the governor, would have reason to send troops to help the Dutch quell the riot for the benefit of Italy. It's just that it's easier to invite the gods than to send them away. If you want the Italians to withdraw, it will be even harder than reaching the sky. Point of course, Antonio is also taking risks. If the riot develops into an armed rebellion or even national independence, it may lead to fire. Antonio was actually a little worried about this, but fortunately, he was also afraid of such a thing happening, so he made plans in advance. If the riot turns into a rebellion, then a regiment of Italian troops will immediately rush to the riot area to let them know how powerful the master is. You can mess around if you think you are useful, and it will take you a minute to destroy you. Point of course, this is a matter for the future. Now we need to give priority to sending people and weapons there. Therefore, what Simon is worried about has no chance of happening. The government still needs him to lead the team to ensure the smooth flow of the line. Point of course, this kind of thing does not need to be reported to Rome, because this is considered his own private action, and Rome does not know about it. If you report it, Rome will turn a blind eye, even if it wants to. However, Rome recently sent a rather strange order, requiring him to expand the military port within 2 years. Italian Borneo currently has a small fleet, so the military port is not that big. On the other hand, because the civilian port is a transfer station, it has been expanded very well. Of course, it is not impossible for civilian ports to dock warships, but they are just not as convenient as military ports. Antonio had a whiff of the order from Rome, but he didn't dare to confirm it due to time constraints anyway. The expansion of the military port is very beneficial to him. No matter what happens in the future, powerful Italian warships can protect Italian Borneo. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284, Future Development of the Steel Industry. While Antonio was thinking about the Dutch next door, a piece of good news in Rome also spread among the government. The news that a large iron ore has been discovered in Libya has been confirmed by professional explorers to be true. Moreover, the iron ore in Sabah is more than 100 million tons and has a mineable reserve of 380 million tons. Why is this not excellent news for Italy? Of course, the discovery of this large iron mine is not just good news. It is located in the hinterland next to the desert and nearly 500 kilometers away from the coast. The transportation link is not easy. There are also different opinions within the government on whether to mine it. The main reason is still the issue of cost, because according to the opinions of experts from the Ministry of Transport, if you want to mine this iron mine, you must build a nearly 800 kilometer long load carrying railway. The construction of such a long railway will be a huge investment for Italy. In particular, desert railway maintenance costs are high, which will also push up the selling price of iron ore. Although open pit mining also has the advantage of lower costs, according to professional estimates, the price of iron ore that eventually reaches the mainland will not be higher than that purchased from Germany. The price of iron ore is too low, only 15% lower at most. After working so hard and spending so much money, we can only achieve this in terms of price. It is normal for many people to have different opinions on this, because it is very simple. The cost of building a standard gauge load carrying railway across the desert for 800 kilometers is between 90 million and 130 million lire. Why is the gap so big? It mainly includes the railway and sand prevention forests on both sides. In addition, because it is located in a desert terrain, annual maintenance costs will be higher than other railways, requiring at least 6 million lire per year, taking into account the current load capacity of trains. One heavy load train can now pull up to 400 tons of cargo. Calculating 3 trains per hour, it is only 14,000 tons per day. Of course, this is an ideal state. Being able to ship 10,000 tons of cargo every day is considered very good and can be regarded as a model for Italian railway operations. Due to maintenance and other reasons, load-carrying railways simply cannot carry such a large volume unless they are double-tracked, but this will further push up the cost of railway construction, with the goal of transporting 3 million tons of iron ore per year on this railway. The railway transportation cost per ton of ore alone will cost 5.1-5.8 lire. Locomotive maintenance, coal burning and other expenses. If you add shipping, loading and unloading, mining and other costs, it will directly push up to about 38 lire per ton. The current average price of iron ore purchased by Italy from abroad is 42 lire. Take the same type of Luxembourg class second iron ore in Sebha iron ore as an example. The price per meal is 42.8 lire. This saves 4.8 lire per ton, which is only more than 14 million lire for 3 million tons per year. After deducting the investment in railway construction and iron ore mining, it will basically take 20 years to recover the investment. Of course, he didn't say a word. By that time, the railway would have to be renovated, and in fact it would not make any money at all. In the palace, Carlo, who had just returned from his honeymoon, listened to the Prime Minister's report on the costs and benefits of iron ore mining. After the Prime Minister finished speaking, Carlo spoke. Indeed, this return on investment is too low, but the government cannot rely on return on investment as the main basis. The mining of Sabha iron ore will have a huge promotion effect on the development of Villa, and it will also provide local data. Thousands of jobs can benefit at least tens of thousands of people, which your government also needs to consider. Yes, in Carlo's view, the emergence of the Sabha iron mine is simply a natural fit for the development of southern Italy. With the coal mines in Kosovo and the iron ore mines in Libya, at least the industrial foundation of southern Italy is already in place. With the emergence of heavy industry, although the development of southern Italy cannot be said to catch up with that of the north, it will not be too far behind. Capital is all about profit, and they will very consciously invest around the steel industry. After all, every copper plate is worth counting. And those who only know how to calculate rewards are simply short-sighted people who have no overall perspective at all. They have no idea what this means for Italy. At least Italy will not be choked by raw materials for the steel industry. Although there was no embargo at all in this era, the influence of later generations' thinking made Carlo not want Italy to be in any danger of being stuck. It is precisely because of knowing this that the veteran pushed hard for the government to develop iron ore in Libya. We cannot always rely on foreign iron ore to develop the steel industry, even from allies. Prime Minister Despertis had already anticipated Carlo's words. After many years of getting along with him, he knew the king's thoughts. It can be said that compared with other countries, this monarch is the most concerned about the development of the kingdom. Of course, he is also a strong monarch, but at present, it seems that a strong monarch is still very beneficial to the development of Italy and can speed up the processing of various affairs. And most of the decisions Carlo made turned out to be correct. This is important, because if a monarch makes a mistake, the consequences can be dire. The Prime Minister's answer made Carlo very satisfied. The cost of purchasing raw materials in Italy is huge every year. Since there are resources in the country, why not use them? At least they can stimulate employment and develop the domestic economy. So, where did your government choose the location of the steel plant? Now, Carlo is concerned about another issue, that is, the location of the steel plant. This issue is equally important, because it can directly provide thousands of jobs for the city where it is located, and it can also promote the development of the city. As for the environmental problem, that will be a major issue in later generations. This era in which national strength is measured by steel does not exist at all. Faced with Carlo's inquiry, Prime Minister Despertis said immediately, "Our government plans to build 3 steel plants in Naples, Palermo and Taranto. Although The Prime Minister talked about building 3 steel plants. Carlo knew that there must be a priority, so how did you arrange it? Of the 3 places selected by our government, Naples has abundant water resources and is also the largest city in the south. Building a steel plant in this city can further accelerate the development of Naples. Therefore, we have prepared for Naples to produce 200,000 yuan in the near future tons of steel smelting plant, with a long-term construction plan of 600,000 tons, which mainly produces pig iron and low-carbon steel. Since Palermo is located in Sicily, we have prepared 150,000 tons in the early stage and 300,000 tons in the long-term steel construction plan. Its production is also mainly based on pig iron and low-carbon steel, and also takes into account medium and high-carbon steel. As for Tabuto, it plans to build a special steel smelting plant to mainly produce high-performance steel for military use. Its production capacity is also the lowest, with an initial level of the target is 30,000 tons, and the long-term plan is 50,000 to 80,000 tons. After listening to the Prime Minister's words, Carlo thought for a while and then said, exchange the steel development in Palermo and Naples, and focus on the development of Palermo's steel industry. There is a reason why Carlo said this. Sicily has a large population. If there are not enough jobs, then this birthplace of the mafia may really have to vigorously develop the mafia point. Carlo has always been very concerned about Sicily, because the relationship between man and land is very tense. Sicily has always been a major source of immigrants. With the development of Italy, Sicily has become a little more peaceful in recent years, but he does not think that this is enough. After hearing Carlo's prompt, the Prime Minister also considered this and did not raise any objection. So the development of the Italian steel industry in the next 5 to 8 years is decided by them. Of course, in order to develop the steel industry, the Italian government needs to invest a lot of money. It is expected that the Balkan Railway, as well as the just decided Libyan Railway, plus 3 steel production plants, will require the government to invest at least 340 million liras. This is a big burden for Italy. For this reason, Carlo is also under great pressure, but perhaps we can take this opportunity to do something that has been pending for a long time. Thinking of this, Carlo picked up the phone. Chief Guard, how did that matter go? Chapter 285 Agitation at the budget meeting. The weather in Rome at the end of December was pleasant, but for General Saragut, the Minister of War, today's weather was terrible. Because he and other military colleagues had to come to a damn meeting. Italy's new annual fiscal meeting. What this meeting has to say is very clear. However, General Saragut knew that today's meeting could be described as a dragon in a tiger's den, because he received news that due to the government's massive construction, today's meeting is likely to take action against the military. No one wants to see the interests of his own department damaged, especially General Saragut, who is the Minister of War. For this reason, Admiral Saragut felt that he and the Minister of the Navy were weak, so he recruited several other admirals. Today's meeting is very serious for us in the army, and we cannot allow the government's intentions to be achieved. Taking advantage of a brief moment before the meeting began, Admiral Saragut called everyone together to cheer up. Don't worry, it's no problem. The army has only shed blood in the Balkans. People in these governments want to burn down bridges. Our 400,000 strong army will never agree. The answers from others satisfied General Saragut. As long as the army is united, it will not be difficult to reduce the army's funding. Admiral Saragut saw with sharp eyes that the Chief of General Staff was not in good spirits, so he asked with concern, Cardona, what's wrong with you? Faced with the question from the Minister of War, General Cardona, the Chief of General Staff, shook his head and replied, it's nothing. I didn't sleep well last night, and I'm a little lacking in energy today, Admiral. Cardona's answer made Admiral Saragut step forward and ask a concerned question. Then you should pay more attention to rest, and don't get too tired. I'll pay attention. While several army generals were chatting, a staff member arrived. Generals, the meeting is about to begin. Then, let's go in. Led by General Saragut, several generals walked into the venue with high spirits. Entering the venue, they saw that Admiral Garlock, the Minister of the Navy, had already arrived, and the Prime Minister, representing the government, and a group of people were sitting on the other side of the long table chatting about something. Several generals naturally sat at the table, waiting for the meeting to begin. Without keeping them waiting, King Carlo, who was presiding over the meeting, entered the venue less than 2 minutes behind them. As soon as Carlo sat down, he immediately spoke. Okay, now the New Year's fiscal budget meeting has begun. Let us listen to the Finance Minister's report first. As Carlo's words fell, Finance Minister Tedula stood up immediately. Your Majesty, colleagues, before I announce the fiscal budget for the new year, as usual, I would like to talk about the fiscal revenue and expenditure for 2091. This year, according to statistics from our Ministry of Finance, the government's total revenue was 1.789 billion lire, expenditure was 2.695 billion lire, and the deficit was as high as 906 million lire. The reason for such a high deficit is on the one hand the war with the Ottomans, and on the other hand investment in new territories, especially mineral development and railway construction in Kosovo, accounts for a high proportion. The fiscal revenue in 1891 seemed to be 147 million lire higher than the historical figure of 1.642 billion lire. But the Italian lira is much stronger now than it has been historically. The current exchange rate between the Italian lira and the pound is approximately 25:1. You need to know the exchange rate between the lira and the pound at this time in history. Due to domestic inflation caused by the trade war between Italy and France, the exchange rate between the lira and the pound reached 28:1. Subsequently, due to the sluggish Italian economy, the exchange rate of the lira has been between 27 and 31. It lingered until after 1900, and then slowly rose a little. However, eventually with the beginning of World War I, the collapse of the Italian economy made the lira become less and less valuable. Everyone present knew what Tedula said, so no one said anything. At most, they muttered in a low voice. They didn't expect the expenses to be so high this year. After briefly talking about the fiscal revenue and expenditure in 1891, he started the general fiscal budget for next year. This is an issue that everyone is concerned about. Next, let me talk about the Ministry of Finance's general budget for 1892. According to the budget summary for the new year, provided by the government and the military, the government's expenditure for the new year is 2.018 billion lire, of which 528 million lire is for the Navy and Army. The budget is 1.49 billion lire. Our Ministry of Finance estimates that the total fiscal revenue in the new year is expected to be about 1.831-1.84 billion lire. If calculated according to the new year's total fiscal budget, our country's national debt will further expand. There is also a risk of bankruptcy. As the finance minister's words fell, it seemed like a battle horn sounded. As Home Secretary, Sabo took the lead. Your Excellency Tedula is right. The total financial budget for next year is indeed too high. I think there are some unnecessary expenses that need to be reduced. The war is now over, and the army still maintains a size of more than 400,000. It is not necessary to retain such a huge scale and drag down government expenditure. The Home Secretary targeted the army as soon as he opened his mouth. General Saragut couldn't bear it, and he retorted directly, "It is simply impossible for our army to accept the decision to reduce its size. The kingdom is still facing danger. As far as our country's main threat is France, the French army currently has 460,000 people. Although our country is in a defensive posture, it cannot be lowered. In addition, the Austro-Hungarian border and domestic garrison strength cannot be less than 70,000. In addition to the 100,000 currently required to perform tasks in the Balkans and North Africa, there are also 50,000 necessary garrison forces in East Africa and Southeast Asia. This scale is just enough. Basic defense needs cannot be reduced at all." After General Saragut's explanation, it was obvious that he thought the size of the army was just right. However, this time the government was well prepared, and Foreign Minister Bacona immediately pointed out the other party's loopholes. "I think your calculations are wrong. Although the French army has 460,000 people, its main target is Germany. There are less than 100,000 people on our border. Considering the harsh terrain on the border between the two countries, I think the defense is more important than France. The border troop strength should not exceed 80,000. The 80,000 troops Boccona mentioned were actually more than enough for defense. According to the Italian army's own estimates, if a positional defense posture is adopted, 80,000 Italian troops are enough to take advantage of the terrain and permanent position fortifications to block twice the enemy's offensive. In the same way, if Italy attacks, France can also block twice the Italian army. In addition, the domestic garrison strength is only 30,000. According to the friendly agreement reached by our country on the Austria-Hungary border, the two countries will deploy no more than 10,000 troops on the border. Admiral Saragut cried out as soon as he heard about the agreement with Austria-Hungary. Why didn't our army receive the message? Tegula smiled slightly. This was just achieved. I haven't had time to report it yet. Faced with the foreign secretary's answer, everyone in the War Department could only stare at each other in confusion. But Tegula would not give them a chance and continued. In addition, the military strength in the Balkans can also be gradually reduced. Most of the local resistance forces have been eliminated, and those that have not been eliminated are still lingering. There is no need to leave too many troops. To gradually reduce the troops to 40,000. Although North Africa is still in the process of suppression, but North Africa's vast territory and sparse population require mainly cavalry. At present, Governor George also believes that the existing troops are sufficient. Finally, the total troops in East Africa and Borneo are only 28,000, and there is no need for 50,000 troops. As Tegula started to calculate, it turned out that only a little over 200,000 troops were needed to meet the current Italian defense. Admiral Saraget's eyes darkened when he heard this, and he immediately counterattacked. You are talking about giving national defense to other countries as a benevolence. This is not advisable at all. If a country threatens us, what can 200,000 troops do? Regarding the rebuttal of the Minister of War, Tegula pointed out unceremoniously. But the current situation is that the government cannot afford to support so many troops. The current cost of more than 500 million for the Navy and Army has accounted for more than a quarter of the government's total budget, which is a drag on the finances. As the voices of the two gradually rose, there was already a hint of gunpowder in the air. Naturally, other participants would not be confused at this time and immediately joined in. One side accused the military budget of being too high, and the other side refuted that the government was making unreasonable troubles. The atmosphere at the scene became agitated for a moment. At this time, there was only a sound of slamming on the table, which attracted everyone's attention. It turned out that the king who was presiding over the meeting was looking at them coldly. Oops, the chapter name is wrong. This is chapter 282, chapter 286, retirement. Everyone, this is a budget meeting, not a quarrel. Please exercise restraint. Although Carlo spoke softly, the weight of his words immediately silenced the venue. Carlo waited until the venue quieted down, and then looked at the Admiralty, who had been silent. Admiral Gorek, how do you think the dispute between the two parties should be resolved? Carlo's words immediately made Admiral Gorek the focus of the meeting. Army colleagues hoped that he would maintain a consistent attitude despite being part of the same military, while the government hoped that the Navy would not be as stubborn as the Army. Admiral Gorek felt the attention from both sides, so he simply made the Navy's attitude public. I think both sides are right, but we need to consider the development of the kingdom more, and everyone needs to be calm. So I think we all need to calm down and have a good talk. As a member of the National Army, the Navy is very willing to serve. We are willing to reduce the number of personnel by 13,000 and the tonnage of naval ships by 43,000 tons. Admiral Gorek's words immediately aroused a burst of warm applause from the government, while the Army looked at the Navy minister's actions. Instant silence. Isn't this putting the Army on the fire? The Navy must have taken the wrong medicine. Prime Minister Despotis immediately took over. Thanks to the efforts of the Navy, we all see the government's efforts in contributing to the national finances. Admiral Gorek stopped talking because the Navy actually took advantage. It sounds like the Navy is going to reduce the number of personnel and ship tonnage. In fact, the personnel the Navy is going to reduce are the Marine Corps. and where these people come from, no one knows yet. At that time, the Marine Corps will be reduced by 1 division and the Praetorian Guard will be expanded by 1 division, and the problem will be solved. As for reducing the tonnage of warships, that is simple. Currently, the Navy still has many steam warships built in the 1960s and 1970s. These warships that should have been retired long ago have been retained because of the need to maintain the size of the fleet. Now we can take this opportunity to decommission these old warships. The only difficulty is the officers and soldiers, but this is not difficult. The Navy always has a place to arrange them, whether it is a transport fleet or other warships. A little point with the Navy's sudden statement. Admiral Saragut and others immediately felt something was wrong. Now that they are being held back, the opposition was so fierce before, and now it is so embarrassing. As the government's second-ranking official Foreign Minister Bacona took the opportunity to say, since the Navy can help relieve the kingdom's debts, I believe that the army, as the pillar of the country, will also be able to understand the kingdom's situation. Upon hearing the words of the foreign minister, General Saragut knew that it was impossible to escape unscathed, so he had to go against his will. In fact, the army also wants to contribute to the kingdom's debt, but it is really impossible to reduce the size of the army to 200,000. We think 350,000 is a very reasonable number. It is obvious that the Minister of War intends to lower his posture and talk about it. According to the scale in his mind, this slowly should be able to retain the size of 300,000 for the army. It is enough for the army to retain just over 200,000, and we need to prioritize resolving the massive debt problem. However, General Saragut's gesture did not make the government relent. Instead, Finance Minister Tedula insisted on a scale of just over 200,000, without giving any chance for discussion. Facing the tough request of the finance minister, Admiral Saragut became angry. He slapped the table and said angrily, "What you are doing is simply bullying the army, and we will not agree to it." As the Minister of War fought back, several other generals also stepped forward. Yes, such a request is too unreasonable. Just as several generals were reprimanding the government, an inappropriate voice suddenly sounded. "Actually, I think an army of 200,000 soldiers is currently sufficient for national defense needs." These sudden words shocked several admirals, because they came from behind them. Several people immediately turned around and found that the person who said this was actually the Chief of General Staff, General Cardona. They were all shocked. General Saragut, who was the Minister of War, glared at him and couldn't help but speak. "Admiral Cardona, do you know what you are talking about?" Facing the army leader's glare, General Cardona looked at him very calmly. "I know what I'm talking about. I think 200,000 troops are enough to meet current national defense needs." As Admiral Cardona finished speaking, a group of burly guards walked into the venue holding their waists, looking at the admirals with serious faces. Although they did not take any other actions, the generals knew the meaning very well. As for the government, except for the Prime Minister, everyone else looked at the scene with shocked expressions, and King Carlo, who was presiding over the meeting, looked at the several generals and said, "You generals are getting old. I think you should spend more time with your family. What do you think?" Carlo's words made several generals look very ugly because they wanted them to retire. And what can they do now? Rejected on the spot. It was originally thought that Carlo's biggest suspect in the army was Lieutenant General Simeon, but no one expected that it was actually one of them, General Cardona, Chief of General Staff. Admiral Cardona also felt bad inside. They had worked together for so many years, and now there was no way he could stand up and ask his old friend to leave. After all, the army is the armed force of the kingdom, and the king's fear of the army traveling beyond his control is a great harm to the army. Especially since they are older, and the king is in his prime, and will have at least 30 or 40 years of power. Will the army still be able to fly into the sky by then? In addition, the king's political skills have become increasingly stronger over the years, and Italy has grown stronger under his leadership. The army cannot resist at all. This is the general trend. There is another reason that cannot be said. Admiral Cardona comes from a military family. Is he really going to hate the king and ruin the future of his family? Carlo, who was talked about by General Cardona, was actually not too nervous. Although he used this method to win the army, it was because the army had to rectify its time point. The army was not used before, because it was necessary to prepare for war with the Ottomans. Look at the performance of the Italian army in the Balkan battlefield. It was worse than Bulgaria, whose weapons were inferior to its own. If it had not roped in Bulgaria, a powerful thug, the war with the Ottomans was really going to be a bad war. As for why they didn't take action immediately after the war, it was also because they wanted to paralyze these military leaders. In order to prepare for today's situation, we have been preparing for several years, and we have finally won over General Cadorna, who has been given the position of Minister of War after such a big effort and preparation for such a long time. A group of military leaders will not complain if they lose point faced with such a scene. General Yekian's face was uncertain. There was no need to think too much. He had no chance to resist. Because it was a budget meeting, they did not bring weapons at all, and they even had only 2 or 3 at a chase. As for whether the army was in turmoil because of their retirement, it was impossible with the traitor Cadorna, the chief of staff. They haven't spoken for a long time, mostly because they really didn't expect it, and haven't been able to accept the reality of retirement. Alas, Admiral Serajut let out a long sigh. I've been busy with military affairs these past few years, and it's been a long time since I've enjoyed family happiness. This was obviously an acceptance of the request to retire, and Admiral Serajut's words shattered the resistance of others. Yes, I haven't seen my little granddaughter for a long time. It's not bad to go back to my hometown and visit. Several military leaders were busy looking for excuses for themselves, and at the same time, the atmosphere in the venue was frightened. No one expected that several military bosses would be dismissed from their posts in this way. Of course there must be insiders, such as the Prime Minister and the Lord of the Admiralty. 2 days later, Serajut and 4 other generals announced that they were retiring from active service due to old age. The government and the king expressed regret and gratitude to the retirement of several generals, and thanked them for their contributions over the years. For this reason, the government not only gave them generous pensions, but also found several mansions for them to enjoy their retirement years. Of course, in view of the many years of hard work of the generals for the country, the government is also very concerned about their health problems, and thoughtfully prepares doctors, nurses, and coachmen for them, so that they can enjoy their old age without being disturbed. In addition, as a reward for the greatest contribution to the Ottoman Empire's war, General Cadorna was awarded the rank of Marshal by Carlo. Let him become the first person in the Italian army, and Marshal Cadorna's new position is Minister of War. As for Lieutenant General Simeon, who also performed well in this war, he was also promoted to general, and took over the post of Chief of General Staff. Chapter 287 Cleaning. As Cadorna becomes the new marshal in charge of the army ministry, as the saying goes, once the emperor and his ministers are equal, a series of adjustments will inevitably be made to the army. Of course, the most important adjustment began with the War Department. Within 3 days of taking office, Marshal Cadorna integrated and changed various departments under the Ministry of War. A large number of officers who were originally affiliated with the other 4 military heads were transferred, dismissed, and used for other purposes. The vacancies left by these people were filled by the personnel brought by Cadorna from the general staff. The reason why Cadorna did this was not only to eliminate the influence of several retired generals, but also to slim down the bloated army. You must know that when General Serajut was in office, the army department, which was controlled by several major military leaders, had as many as 591 officers at all levels. There were too many personnel, overlapping management, and hands-on everything, which led to the inefficiency of the army department. This is true in Cadorna seems undesirable. Without building the army department into a capable leadership department, how can he be distinguished from his predecessors? Of course, in the process of downsizing the army department, many powers will also be delegated to other departments. Among them, the one who has gained the most is the general staff. At present, the Italian general staff is not as good as the German army, which has a staff-first position, and even the Russian army is not as good as it is in previous military exchanges. The German side pointed out several times that the Italian army ministry had too much power and was not conducive to the construction and command of the army. The Italian army did not pay attention to the opinions of the allies at all, and it seemed that the King dynasty had its own national conditions here. The reason for this is precisely because several military leaders are unwilling to lose their rights. They are not even willing to let the king intervene in the army, let alone the nonsense of others. After several talks with no results, Germany stopped talking. However, Cadorna shared the power of the army department with the general staff. In addition to complying with the development of the times, he also did not want to give the impression that he had great power. After all, several people who had previously controlled the power of the army have now retired and are enjoying their old age, and he does not want to follow suit. He is only 68 years old now and can still fight for the kingdom for more than 10 years. The General Staff Department, where I had been for more than 10 years, is a good target for decentralization. On the one hand, this allows the government and the king to see the new atmosphere of the army. On the other hand, how can I say that I have stayed at the General Staff for so many years? Although a large number of officers have been transferred to the Army Department, my influence is still there. As for the fact that as time goes by, his influence in the General Staff headquarters will become less and less, there is nothing that can be done about it and no one can avoid it. When Marshal Cadorna vigorously purged the Ministry of War and reduced the power of Sergeant and others, the troops stationed in the local area would inevitably be affected. Currently stationed in the headquarters of the 6th Army in Albania, Lieutenant General Baxter is as restless as an ant in a hot pot. The reason is simple. Everything that is happening in the city of Rome makes him feel extremely worried. His old superior General Tapia and several others suddenly announced their retirement a few days ago, which shocked him. He knew that something big had happened in Rome, but he was left in Albania and could do nothing. Therefore, he paid extremely close attention to the news in Rome and checked newspapers, telegrams and other contents every day. Of course, the news in the army is the first to be paid attention to, and any disturbance must be seen with a magnifying glass, let alone Marshal Cadorna, who is going to war in the Ministry of War, and it was by observing Cadorna's actions at the War Department that he became even more concerned. Because Cadorna, the newly promoted marshal, is vigorously purging other forces, and Lieutenant General Baxter is the second in command of Admiral Tapia's force. For this reason, he had to use confidential military communications to personally contact several other colleagues to discuss everyone's way out. Of course, he was also in contact with other forces, but the results after contact were not ideal. Those people are timid and simply impossible to work with. So there are some things that must be considered. General Major Kazim has arrived. Upon hearing the guard's report, Lieutenant General Baxter immediately spoke with a hint of anticipation. Invite him in quickly. Kazim is a key figure in the plan. As the commander of the army, his travels are very eye-catching, so he has Major Kazim take part in many private matters. After all, he is his adjutant and is much more concealed than himself. How is it going? After the guards exited, Lieutenant General Baxter immediately asked the dusty former adjutant in a low voice, "General, the situation of the trip is not good. Except for 4 people including Colonel Lane of the 18th Division and Colonel Uller of the 23rd Division, the others did not agree. They said that the general's move was too risky, and it was very possible there will be serious consequences." Kazim's words immediately made Lieutenant General Baxter's face dark and point. Looking at the Lieutenant General's gloomy expression, Major Kazim asked softly, "Lieutenant General, what should we do next? Since they are unwilling, then ignore them and continue to contact Ren and Uller. However, you must keep it confidential and wait for my instructions to tell you anything else." "Okay, Lieutenant General." After the former adjutant left, Baxter showed a frustrated look. "It's so hard to protect yourself. These people were all promoted by themselves. I didn't expect that they would be so withdrawn and ignore their own expectations after showing off their words, but I'm unwilling to accept myself like this. I have worked hard in the army for so many years and was ordered to retire. Isn't all these years of hard work in vain?" While Baxter was worried about his future, Kazim left with an equally uncertain expression. Like Baxter, he was thinking about his future. Following Baxter for so many years, Kazim also knew the top brass of the military very well, and the retirement of several previous bosses also shocked him. However, Considering that he had followed the general for many years, he suppressed it. As for now, he felt that he needed to think about himself. Continuing to follow the general will only lead you to a dead end. Maybe it's time to think of other ways. Thinking of this, he turned in a different direction and walked towards an unknown building. There is a row of letters on that building that clearly says 6th Army Military Police Department. 2 days later, when Baxter was presiding over a military meeting, a group of soldiers with military police badges rushed in. Lieutenant General Baxter, who collapsed on the ground, was taken away directly after Major Galoppa, the captain of the gendarmerie, presented an arrest warrant from Rome. 4 others, including Lieutenant General Baxter, received the same treatment as Colonel Lane, Chief of Staff of the 18th Division, and Colonel Earle, commander of the 2nd Regiment of the 23rd Division. The reason for their arrest was that they were trying to create rebellion in the military. It can be said that the arrest of Lieutenant General Baxter scared away the dissatisfaction felt by many people in the army. Many people feel that this rectification cannot escape the passers-by, and they directly request to retire due to their age, health and other reasons. Facing the retirement application sent to him, Marshal Cardona waved his hand and directly agreed. In the past 3 months of cleaning, 38 generals and 126 school-level officers have been withdrawn from active service. As for those who are as bold as Lieutenant General Baxter, there are only a very small number of them, and most of them can go home and enjoy their old age. Of course, this is because Cardona is unwilling to expand the scope of the purge. After all, purging too many officers will reduce the combat effectiveness of the army. Chapter 288 Expansion. When purging other military leaders, Cardona also did not forget those moths in the army. Although these moths have low official positions, they still hold the key to the procurement and storage of materials in the army. The harm they cause to the army is not low. In addition to lining their own pockets, they will also quickly form a huge network of connections like a spider web. This is why they have become a chronic disease in the military. Cleaning one pulls out a large area, making the task of cleaning it up significantly more difficult. These borers were also the targets that Cardona wanted to eliminate after he took office as Minister of War. The army is not a garbage dump, and any garbage can be thrown there. An efficient and clean army can ensure combat effectiveness. Of course, Marshal Cardona himself had received benefits before this, but it was just to paralyze the delaying tactics of those fighting against the kingdom's military leaders. What do you know? But as the saying goes, only after you break away will you feel how bad your previous situation was. So taking advantage of this trend, Marshal Cardona naturally aimed his gun at these moths. The Uritana Army Reserve Warehouse in Turin is one of the 5 major warehouses of the army. Due to the tense relationship with France in recent years, the warehouse has also received considerable attention and was renovated quickly. Moreover, all materials purchased by the army will basically have a share in this warehouse, so this is also an area hardest hit by corruption. Lieutenant Colonel Pavel, we are from the Military Police Department, and we need to find out something from you. A team of military police suddenly broke into the office of the warehouse chief, Lieutenant Colonel Pavel, and said the above to the fat Lieutenant Colonel. But after hearing the words of the military policeman, Lieutenant Colonel Pavel's face turned pale. The power of the word military policeman and the military can be seen. The military police officer leading the team looked at the warehouse officer who was slumped in the chair with disgust. He waved his hand and the 2 men behind him lifted the fat pig up. You can't treat me like this. I'm a lieutenant colonel. Lieutenant Colonel Pavel screamed and struggled. The fierce struggle made the 2 military police holding him lose control. Seeing this, the leading officer punched the lieutenant colonel, letting the lieutenant colonel know the consequences of resistance. Lieutenant Colonel Pavel, who was in pain and wanted to bend over but couldn't, no longer struggled without paying. The leading officer, satisfied with the effect, looked at him. Are you awake now? Lieutenant Colonel Pavel, who had become honest, was taken away by the military police. As for how much impact it will have on warehouse personnel, I don't know. After possessing the evidence like Lieutenant Colonel Pavel, many people were taken away directly. These were the ones who had been too high profile before, so they were also the first batch of targets to be attacked. Of course, in addition to these conclusive evidences, the army also cooperates with the government to dig deep into the hidden bugs Of course, this kind of hidden moth is much harder to dig out than those that can directly convict someone. Point in an office in a storage area, a military police officer looked at the major officer sitting opposite him and said, "Major Avila, I'm sorry to interrupt you this time, but we have a question to ask you." Major Avila looked at the officer opposite him without changing his expression and said in a surprised tone, "Your Excellency, if you have something to say, I will tell you everything. My time here is precious, and I hope to keep it short." Looking at Major Avila with an innocent look on his face, the military police officer secretly praised him for his good psychological quality. Most people would not be afraid to see him, let alone being talked to alone. It's a pity that such a good psychological quality would do such a wrong thing. But then again, if he didn't have such a good psychological quality, how could his superiors and subordinates think that he was reliable and honest? Major Avila, I would like to ask you, we found that your wife has a huge deposit in the bank, amounting to more than 4 million lire. Please explain to me why a housewife who does not work has so much money. How can you not save so much based on your salary alone? The military police officer's words made Major Avila look shocked. You mean my wife has more than 4 million lire in savings? No wonder you came to me. You must think that I embezzled the money. In terms of acting skills, Major Avila is absolutely outstanding. He vividly showed the shock of an upright officer when he heard that his wife had a huge sum of money. At the same time, he also showed that he finally understood why the military police officer came to him and showed understanding and reception. The grievances were all revealed in just a short moment. Okay, Major Avila, stop pretending. Your wife has admitted that the money came from you. Now you can explain it. This is impossible. How could she wrongly accuse me like this? Bang. The office door opened and the officer came out. How's it going? Has he taken it? A military police officer who had been waiting outside the door asked the man who had just come out. No, he insisted that he had no knowledge. How was the interrogation over there? After putting a cigarette in his mouth, the officer who had just come out asked his colleagues. There is still no progress. His wife just said a word and she doesn't know why there are so many deposits in the bank. So, have you found any clues at the bank? Don't mention it. The employee who was responsible for handling his business has resigned. I'm sending someone to look for him. Damn it. These banks must be shirking. They are afraid of affecting their business, but they have to comply with the government's orders, so they will blame it on the employees who have resigned. They expect that we can't do anything to them. Don't think about these useless things. This is beyond our control. Just do your own thing and bring Major Avila to justice first. The brief conversation between the two illustrates the difficulty of punishing corruption in the military. In fact, this is also the current problem in punishing corruption in Italy. Without enough evidence, those corrupt elements cannot be convicted at all. Of course, no matter how difficult it is, the military also has its own way to solve the problem, but this method is not very comfortable. That is to order the officer to retire, determine that the officer is unfit to serve in the army for other reasons, and kick him out of the army. But this method should only be used as a last resort. After all, you know that the other party is embezzling and accepting bribes, but you can't deal with the other party. Instead, you watch him leave with the stolen money. Doesn't this dampen the morale of the military police and other supervisory agencies? Who wants to see this happen? Of course, no matter what, the investigation work in the army continues. Examples like Major Avila's can only be considered a very small number and cannot be used as evidence that the supervisory agencies are not doing their job. Of course, no matter what, after the purge of the new officer Marshal Cardona, the future combat effectiveness of the Italian army is worth looking forward to. Chapter 289 Non-Commissioned Officer Reform, Part 1. Marshal Cardona took office as a new officer and made a big splash with 3 fires. All eyes in the army were attracted to it. General Simeon, who is also a new official, seems to have disappeared and has not made any moves. Is it because Simeon, who was suddenly promoted to Chief of General Staff and became the second most powerful person in the army, has not yet recovered from his joy? Or do you have to be careful because you get a high position? The above are all Simeon's thoughts, but he prepared a stunning appearance to make everyone remember him. Oh, it's finally done. In his own office at the General Staff Headquarters, General Simeon looked at the wet manuscript in front of him and stretched. The manuscript in front of him was exactly the way he was planning to hold back his debut. The standardization of the non-commissioned officer system. Non-commissioned officers, to put it bluntly, are professional soldiers. Simeon's approach is to regularize professional soldiers. The military system in Europe has always been a recruitment system, and the recruitment model was mixed with it until Prussia promoted the Omen system. Various countries also vigorously developed the recruitment system. However, with the development of the times, a large number of new weapons have been added to the army. Wars have become more and more diverse, and the command and tactical requirements of the army have also increased at the same level. General Simeon also felt the shortcomings in the army's command during the Italian-Turkish War that just passed. This is especially true for low-level company and platoon-level battles. After General Simeon collected the manuscript he had just written, he called his secretary. "Get the car ready. Let's go to the War Department." Yes, this matter must be promoted with the support of Marshal Cardona, Minister of War, because this is a major overhaul of the army, and without the support of the first person in the army, it is just empty talk. The Chief of General Staff talks to the Minister of War, and a meeting with the first and second most important figures in the army is also very quick. No matter how busy the Minister of War is, he still needs to receive the Chief of General Staff as soon as possible when he arrives. "Simone, are you still used to living in the General Staff?" "Well, enough. Those officers didn't do anything treacherous, did they?" "That's not true. They are still very disciplined." After a brief chat, Marshal Cardona immediately got down to business. "Come to me this time. Do you need my help with anything?" Faced with Marshal Cardona's inquiry, Simeon was not polite. "Yes, Marshal, I just need your help with something." As soon as he finished speaking, Simone handed over the manuscript he carried with him. "This is my little suggestion for the development of the army." Cardona opened it and said with a smile, "The standardization of the non-commissioned officer system is not trivial just looking at the title, and it is also very difficult to achieve, Marshal." Cardona said this for a reason. Even though it only involves non-commissioned officers, it is about changing the structure of the military. When it comes to the structure of the military, there are no small things. Faced with the words of the Minister of War, Simeon immediately explained, "I feel that the non-commissioned officer class will become the key point in the military in the future, so I want to promote this work, no matter how difficult it is. I want to try." Now that Simeon has said this, what else can Cardona say? He can only pick up the manuscript in front of him and read it carefully. The room was very quiet for a while, except for the ticking of the pendulum. It's very detailed and very helpful for grassroots companies to improve their combat effectiveness. After reading the manuscript, Marshal Cardona evaluated the plan, but his words changed. "But by doing this, you are decentralizing power to junior officers. Have you considered this factor?" After all, he was a marshal, and Cardona could still see many things, and even see further. Although this plan talks about promoting non-commissioned officers, it involves many people. Facing Marshal Cardona's question, General Simeon nodded and answered, "I have thought about it, and the impact is not too big. Because with the development of the times, officers need to master more skills. If they cannot delegate some power, many people will not be able to keep pace." Simeon said it a bit euphemistically, but he was actually referring to the uneven quality of officers. At present, a high proportion of military officers from various countries come from aristocratic and military families, and this trend becomes more obvious the higher you get to the top. Among these nobles and officers from military families, we do not deny that there are geniuses among them, but most of them are mediocre people. Of course, Simeon did not think about challenging this, but wanted to improve the army's combat effectiveness by promoting the non-commissioned officer class. After all, compulsory service only lasts for 3 years. How can professional soldiers who have served for 8, 9 or more than 10 years be as capable as they are? As for officers who graduated from military academies, their starting point is basically company commander. For squads and platoons that are closer to the soldiers, they are more likely to be non-commissioned officers. These non-commissioned officers who have served longer are the link between officers and soldiers, so deepening the role of non-commissioned officers will be of great help to the army. Although these are all described in detail in Simeon's plan, Marshal Cardona wanted to ask something that was not in the plan. Simone, I already know the role of non-commissioned officers from your plan. Then I would like to ask something else. If you have such high requirements for non-commissioned officers, what should you do in terms of welfare benefits? After all, they are not compulsory soldiers and need to consider supporting their families. The problem, it was clear that Cardona was concerned about the cost of the changes to the NCOs. There is no way. Currently, among the army funds in various countries, the cost for salaries and wages is always the largest. Even in later years, salary and stipend expenses are still the most important component of funding. General Simeon said when faced with the funding issue raised by Marshal Cardona. I have also thought about this issue. If according to the non-commissioned officer plan I proposed, a fully staffed division will need at least more than 1,300 non-commissioned officers. And according to the current domestic income situation, on average each non-commissioned officer will have at least 1,300 non-commissioned officers per month. It takes 85 lire to keep up with the domestic income level. Then the annual cost of these more than 1,300 non-commissioned officers will reach more than 1.2 million. If the entire army completes the transformation of non-commissioned officers, the cost will not be less than 1.0 million, more than 18 million. Having said that, considering that the cost is not low, Simeon added another sentence. But if the transformation is completed, the combat effectiveness of the army will be significantly improved. Don't blame Simone for saying this. Although the annual expenses for the army are not low, they are still very tight. They measure their pants based on their buttocks and there is no money left at all. If you want to take out the money, you have to withhold it from other sources, let alone under the premise of this kind of disarmament. So, even though Cardona is an army man, he still has to learn to live frugally. Let's show the plan to His Majesty. If he agrees, then we will choose one division to pilot it first. If the effect is good, it will be extended to the entire army. Although Marshal Cardona did not agree immediately, but instead proposed to do a pilot to see the effect, Simeon was still very grateful to him. Because this method is the best, as long as the pilot unit is effective, it will just stop the officers' mouths thinking of this. Simone was confident enough to go to the palace, to meet His Majesty Carlo. Chapter 219 on Commissioned Officer Reform, Part 2. This is very good, and will be of great help to the army. Putting down the plan in his hand, Carlo praised General Simeon in front of him. Carlo's words made the Chief of General Staff finally let go. After all, this is his first move after taking office as Chief of General Staff. If it ends before it even begins, wouldn't it be a huge loss of face? Although this possibility is very low, it is not 100% certain, and it is inevitable to be worried. Then, His Majesty also agrees with this plan. Facing Simone's question, Carlo nodded and answered, "This plan is already very good, so why should I oppose it?" To say that Carlo did not care about the army would be an injustice to him. Even when the army was dominated by several military leaders, Carlo never stopped paying attention to the army. Although the Italian army performed well before, as long as you take a closer look at its opponents, you will know that the Italian army is not as strong as it appears. The relatively primitive Ethiopian army attacked with heavy troops. As for fighting the sick man of the Near East, it would be too much. If we don't involve Little Prussia in the Balkans, it can be said that it is the victories that cover up the various problems of the army. It also causes outsiders to have a certain bias in their estimation of Italy's strength. Now seeing the new number 1 and 2 figures in the military launching reforms to address the army's problems, how could Carlo refuse? Besides, although Simeon's non-commissioned officer reform seems a bit crude and cannot be compared with the later German army of 100,000, it is still ahead of its time in this era. Of course, as the king, Carlo still wanted to know the Chief of General Staff's plan for the non-commissioned officers. Simone, what do you think of the development of non-commissioned officers? Faced with Carlo's inquiry, Simone pondered for a while and then spoke. With the development of the non-commissioned officer class, I think that with the advancement of science and technology, the requirements for military technical personnel are getting higher and higher, and the non-commissioned officer class will definitely become popular. As for now, non-commissioned officers play more of a helper role for officers, but the role cannot be underestimated either. Having said this, Simeon decided to talk about the stubborn problems in the army. Your Majesty must also know that the current sources of officers in the army mainly come from military academies, and graduates of military academies are generally awarded the rank of lieutenant. After 3 to 6 months of internship in the army, they will become the chief and deputy chief officers of a company. Carlo also knew what Simeon said, and he didn't feel anything was wrong with it. I know this is the case. The armies of all countries are basically like this. Is there any problem? That's not a problem, but the number of graduating military cadets is a problem. Carlo frowned when he heard this. What happened? It's like this. Although there are more than 400 military academy graduates every year, only about 300 enter the military. In Simone's narration, Carlo finally knew some secrets that were unknown to outsiders. Every year, 15% to 25% of military academy graduates will not enter the military at all. These graduates who do not enter the military will be awarded the rank of reserve lieutenant and then placed in the reserves. This doesn't seem like much on the surface. It exists in every country, but Italy is higher. But the situation in Italy is different. These reserve officers are basically nobles. After retaining their status as reserve officers, they continue to be busy with the affairs of their respective families. The ranks of their reserve officers will continue to be promoted as time goes by. More importantly, these reserve officers are promoted very quickly, basically reaching one level at a rate of 3 or 4 years. Moreover, after being promoted to school level officers, many noble officers will be recruited by the army and rejoin the army to become division level officers. You see, while other officers who graduated from school were struggling in the army, the aristocratic officer who found a new way completed his promotion at a very fast speed while drinking coffee and chatting at home. Hearing this, Carlo's face didn't look good. No wonder the army's combat effectiveness has always been poor. He always thought this was due to the army's chaotic material management, serious corruption, and obvious equipment gaps. It turns out that there is still such a situation of taking the fast track. This will also dampen the enthusiasm of those officers who work hard to fight as civilians in the military. After all, this kind of thing is very damaging to confidence. But even though he already knew it, the solution couldn't be solved in just one sentence. After all, the nobles have their own basic base. Although this basic base has begun to deteriorate, it cannot be abandoned. Because of this thinking of this, Carlo said, I know about this, please don't say anything about it for now. I'll solve this problem when I'm ready. Carlo's words made Simeon sigh inwardly. In fact, he regretted it. As soon as he said it, he knew that there must be a large group of nobles with vested interests behind this kind of thing. If he raised this issue himself, wouldn't this embarrass the king? Carlo's answer showed that he was an enlightened monarch and would not let go of such harm to the army. So, are there any problems in the army? After hearing about such shortcuts in the army, Carlo wanted to get more information from Simeon. That's all I know. Other situations can be handled. To be able to ask one question like this is already considered very courageous for Simeon. If he asked a few more questions, where would Simeon's courage come from? After seeing that Simeon stopped talking, Carlo did not force him. In this case, you should implement the sergeant's plan first. I'm very optimistic about your plan. It will definitely become the key to the army's combat effectiveness. After sending Simone away, Carlo sat in the office and pondered. As a result of this situation, Carlo also knew that this was the reason why the binding force of the nobles was somewhat low. As for the root cause, the unification of Italy was too smooth and the kingdoms were not properly cleaned up at all. The remaining poison has been affecting the development of Italy. However, knowing the cause does not mean that a solution will be immediately available. Dealing with aristocratic issues was a great test of Carlo's political skills. To use a common saying, this is like tofu falling into the ashes, unable to be beaten or blown. But even so, Carlo wanted to give it a try. After all, these nobles had a huge impact on the development of the country. Thinking of this, Carlo picked up the phone. Call the captain of the guard. I have something to talk to him about. After putting down the phone, Carlo naturally thought that, since the Army had this situation, would the Navy also have it? But after some thinking, Carlo put this worry behind him. The Navy is a technical service. In this era of rapid technological advancement, if we don't work hard, we will fall behind. There will be no loopholes for such reserve officers to exploit. The Navy does not have a big problem in this regard. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291, New Naval Gun. What is the Navy that Carlo is talking about doing now? Admiral Gorek, currently the head of the Navy, is inspecting the Taranto Naval Arsenal with a group of people. The Tabuto Naval Arsenal was newly built after the unification of Italy. Although it is not as good as the Genoa Naval Arsenal, as an arsenal that mainly develops new naval artillery technology, the Tabuto Naval Arsenal is still very capable. Every year, the Navy allocates tens of millions of liras to invest in technology research and development. Tabuto can receive millions of funds every year, which also shows its status in the eyes of the Navy. The Navy comes to inspect the factory every year, and this time Admiral Garlick and his team also had a mission. Led by Mr. Gregor, the director of the arsenal, and Mr. Irie, the chief technical expert. The group came to an artillery testing site. Here, a brand new cannon appeared in front of everyone. Please take a look. This is our newly developed 240mm naval gun. Factory. Director Gregor pointed at this new artillery and introduced it to the Navy personnel. This naval gun adopts new barrel retreat technology, which not only increases the rate of fire, but also crushes old naval guns in terms of range and power. The words of Factory Director Gregor made everyone in the Navy shine. Someone asked impatiently, what are the data of this gun? Faced with this question, Irie, who is a technology developer, immediately answered. The gun is 240/40L, weighs 25.6 tons, has a total length of 9.8 meters, a bull length of 8.91 meters, and a rate of 1.5 rounds per minute. It uses a new smokeless propellant. The gun has a maximum elevation angle of 30 degrees and a maximum range of 16,900 meters. The muzzle velocity is at 690 meters per second. The armor-piercing projectile weighs 140 kilograms, and the grenade weighs 148 kilograms. Hearing Irie's introduction, everyone in the Navy was very surprised. Although this is the data from the test site, if it is actually put on a battleship, the data will be much lower, and it is impossible to achieve this effect. However, it is still much stronger than the 256mm naval gun currently equipped by the Italian Navy, and of course the weight is also higher. Out a lot. Why is the rate of fire so fast? Is this the control technique you just use? All the people in the Navy present were more or less knowledgeable about technology. As soon as they heard Irie's introduction, someone raised this point. Your Excellency is right. At present, all countries are moving closer to the technology of control and withdrawal. As the main naval gun supplier of the Navy, of course we cannot give up the advanced technology of control and withdrawal. In fact, Irie still has something to say. The research and development of this naval gun is actually not easy. The Tabuto Naval Arsenal project was established in early 1988, and it has not been until today that a prototype gun was produced. The hard work of these 4 years has finally come to fruition. Of course, the Tabuto factory also received technical support from Krupp and Skoda, and they did not suffer. Italy also exchanged its own expertise. Take a shot first. Let's see. Following Admiral Garlick's words, the staff at the test site immediately distributed earplugs to everyone. After a lot of busy work, everyone took off their earplugs with the sound of a deafening cannon. Admiral Gorek, who could still feel the roar in his ears, looked at the prototype cannon being cleaned and praised it with a satisfied expression. You can tell by the sound that it is indeed much more powerful than previous naval guns. Admiral Gorek's words were recognized by others. They had all been fighting naval guns for half their lives, and naturally they had developed the ability to distinguish naval guns. By listening to their sounds, the new naval gun is outstanding in every aspect, and one word of praise is not an exaggeration. Then, our new armored cruiser should also use this gun as its main gun. This sentence suddenly appeared, causing the scene to become silent. Point involving the construction plan of new armored cruisers. It is definitely a very important key issue for the Navy. Point it has entered its 9th year since the appearance of the Venetian class, the improved class in late 1885, which should be counted as a class. Although the Venetian class is very excellent as a cruiser designed 9 years ago, it should also be its time for a new generation. Point within the Admiralty, there are various debates about the new patrol equipment. Excluding other arguments that do not occupy the mainstream, there are currently 2 main opinions. One of the more radical views is to integrate various emerging naval technologies into the new cruise ship, using the best in terms of gun power and layout. Warships built in this way will inevitably allow Italian cruise ships to lead the world trend again. Of course, this expenditure may also lead the trend and achieve greater successes for the conservatives. They believe that the Venice-class cruise ship is already very good. Although it does not appear to be the most advanced batch at present, it can be proved through years of use that the ship is still very good. You can use this as a template to add some new technology upgrades to create the most optimized and most suitable patrol equipment for the Italian Navy. Point of course, the cost will be much lower this way. Point the 2 views were debated endlessly in the Navy, and neither one could convince the other. Fortunately, the Navy is a technical branch, and both sides are civilized people who use words, but not actions among them. The radical faction is dominated by cutting-edge officers in the Navy and designers from major shipyards. They believe that, since the Navy is a technical service, new technologies are very important. Point conservatives, mainly military officers, believe that the Navy also needs to consider costs and actual needs, and cannot blindly raise technical requirements. So this is a reason why the scene is quiet. After all, this may trigger a new round of controversy. There is no urgency about the new armored patrol. I heard that Krupp is developing new armor steel. We can wait a little longer. In addition, we also need to implement communications and other aspects before starting construction. So there is no rush at the moment. Let those ships' designers should keep track of new technologies first. Fortunately, Admiral Garlock was experienced and immediately dispelled everyone's thoughts. Now that a new 240mm naval gun has been developed, your factory should continue to work hard and continue to challenge larger calibers. Although Gorek's words had no other intention, Gregor, as the director of the factory, could not help but think about it. Is it to prepare the main gun of the new battleship? Please rest assured that our factory will definitely step up research and development and will not let the new large caliber main gun lag behind others. At this point, factory director Gregor suddenly asked, "Admiral, can I ask whether the next step in research and development will be based on 280mm or 305mm?" Facing factory director Gregor's inquiry, Admiral Gorek replied casually, "Let's focus on 305mm. Okay." Now many people feel confident. Point, and regardless of what anyone thought, Admiral Garlock left them alone because he was ready to retire. Point, that's right. Admiral Garlock, who has worked for the Navy all his life, wants to retire. Of course, he didn't want to retreat now. He would not leave until Admiral Yaji became familiar with the Admiralty. Point, yes, Admiral Yaji was his chosen successor in the competition to succeed the position of Minister of the Navy. Yaji, who was promoted to Admiral, won. Point, of course, this also shows that compared with General Garlock, the army chiefs are really hateful. Chapter 292, the First Balkan Crisis. When Italy only wanted to develop itself, a conflict that had just occurred in the Balkans forced Italy into it. Point, Provos is a small village on the edge of the new territory of Seborgia. Due to the unclear demarcation of the border, both countries claim this small village as their own. Point, since both parties claim the village, it has become a small focus for both parties. One early morning in April, a patrol from Bulgaria discovered that the Serbs were actually building a sentry post here, so they stepped forward to stop it. Point, of course, the Serbian army was unwilling to let the security forces come to stop them, so while the two parties were pushing and shouting, it was unknown who encountered the gun and went off, and an unexpected fierce battle began. The final result was that the Serbian army suffered more than 20 casualties, and the Bulgarian army also suffered more than 10 casualties. Then the two armies began to gather here, and a confrontation began. Dear His Majesty King Carlo, the despicable Serbs, they shot our patrol officers and soldiers, and occupied Prevoz, that belongs to our country. Now our country needs your help. Pozniakov, the Bulgarian ambassador to Rome, is paying an urgent visit to Carlo. Facing the Bulgarian ambassador asking for help. Carlo already knew the news, but he didn't want to give an answer right away. Ambassador Pozniakov, as friends who have worked hand in hand with you, we will not sit idly by and ignore the situation you mentioned, but please rest assured, I will convene the ministers to discuss it. After seeing off the Bulgarian ambassador, Carlo immediately called Foreign Minister Bacona. What's going on? I remember that the Bulgarians didn't suffer. They still have the advantage. Why are they so anxious to ask for our support? Facing the king's question, Bacona immediately answered his doubts. Your Majesty, according to the latest news, Greece and the Ottomans have just expressed their strong opposition to Bulgaria's invasion of neighboring countries, and Romania also condemns this act. Bacona's words immediately changed Carlo's expression. This situation was too unfriendly to Italy. Except for Italy, Bulgaria is surrounded by a circle of enemies. Carlo was a little puzzled by this. I know that the two countries, Sicily and Bulgaria, have disputes with Bulgaria in Macedonia, and the Ottomans are unwilling to lose so much territory. So why is Romania like this? In fact, Carlo said it very euphemistically. This is not a dispute between Bulgaria and Sicily. Ever since Bulgaria acquired most of Macedonia, the relationship between the two countries and Bulgaria has deteriorated. Newspapers of the two countries have been talking about it every day. Bulgaria usurped the interests of both countries affected by the domestic media. Many radicals from the two countries often cross the border to Bulgaria's new territories to cause trouble. This led to suppression by Bulgaria, and the resentment between the people of the two countries towards Bulgaria became more and more profound. There are two ethnic groups, the Serbian and Greeks, in the Bulgarian-occupied Macedonia. Radicals from the two countries used this opportunity to cause trouble, which also triggered Bulgaria's suppression. This was a disaster for the two ethnic groups in Bulgaria, the Serbian and Greek. The conflict between Serbia and Bulgaria in Prevoz is also an explicit outbreak of these ethnic issues. Regardless of who is right in this conflict, it is now time to choose sides. It is obvious that Greece and Ottoman side with Serbia. Even Romania, a somewhat unrelated country, stood opposite Bulgaria. This was something Carlo couldn't understand. Are all Bulgarian diplomats pigs? They can't see the situation clearly. Facing Carlo's question, Bacona immediately explained why Romania stands opposite Bulgaria. The main issue is the Great Bulgarianism. In Bacona's narration, Carlo finally understood why Bulgaria pushed Romania into the opposite direction. The blame was on Big Bulgarism, Great Bulgarianism, which attempted to incorporate Macedonia and Thrace into its own territory, reached a new peak immediately after Bulgaria acquired Central and Northern Macedonia. Greater Bulgarism, which was originally very popular in the country, has since become the consensus of the vast majority of Bulgarians, who are eager to see Bulgaria return to its past glory point. But they didn't notice the increasingly ugly expressions on the faces of their neighbor Romanians. As the strongest country in the Balkans, Romania is extremely wary of Bulgaria. On the one hand, there is the special relationship between Bulgaria and Russia, and on the other hand, after annexing most of Macedonia, Bulgaria has become a challenger to Romania, the strongest country in the Balkans. Therefore, it is only natural that Romania stands on the opposite side of Bulgaria. No one wants to see their neighbor being too powerful, not to mention that this neighbor may have ulterior motives. Don't think that the Romanians are worrying in vain. Historically, as Bulgaria became stronger, it had a lot of trouble with the Romanians living in the lower reaches of the Danube River. It's going to be difficult now. Carlo then thought of something again, and continued to ask, what about other countries' attitudes towards this? Of course, Bacona knew that His Majesty was asking about the attitude of the great powers, so he immediately spoke. At present, no other country has taken a position except Russia, and the Russians are calling for restraint. Yes, the conflict between Serbia and Bulgaria is very difficult for the Russians. Both parties to the conflict are considered little brothers to Russia. Although the little brother Bulgaria has conflicts from time to time, with the special relationship between the two countries, it can barely be regarded as Russia's sphere of influence point in this current situation. What else can Russia do besides calling on both parties to exercise restraint? Preferring to either side will definitely offend the other. As for other major powers not taking a stand, they just want to wait and see. There is also a possibility that they are waiting for participating countries to choose their teams, although other countries can wait. Carlo understands that Italy cannot wait. But before that, Italy must figure out the attitude of one of the countries. Bacona, send a telegram to Britain and inquire about the other party's attitude towards this conflict. Yes, what Carlo wanted to ask about was the attitude of the British. Although Britain does not have many interests in the Balkans, it has not shown much interest. But when it comes to the issue of containing Russia, the British Empire is not as careless as it seems on the surface. They must have their own ideas, and Carlo wanted to know London's opinion, because Italy was also unwilling to see Russia profiting from this conflict. As for the attitude of Austria-Hungary, another stakeholder country, he could also guess a little bit. It is nothing more than waiting for others to come to beg for it, because this conflict is also an opportunity for Austria-Hungary. Although the two countries are allies, seeing the huge benefits Italy has gained in the Balkans, it is impossible to say that Vienna will not be tempted. Of course, no matter what others do, Italy's interests in the Balkans must be protected. For this reason, Italy cannot sit back and watch the storm unfold like other countries. Chapter 293 Balkan Arbiter. The reply from the UK that Carlo was waiting for came quickly, and he was informed the next day, but the news was somewhat unexpected. Is this really what the British say? Yes, Your Majesty. Our ambassador heard this reply from the British Prime Minister with our own ears. The reason that surprised Carlo was simple. The British reply was that the British Empire did not want to see conflicts in the Balkans, which would cause regional disasters. So the British Empire hoped that the situation could calm down as soon as possible and give the region a peaceful and tranquil environment. The Englishman looked exactly as he had imagined, but this feeling of surprise after he had completely guessed it made Carlo have to confirm. Since the British also have this attitude, the next step will be much easier. He picked up the phone in front of him and ordered, invite Marshal Cardona and Admiral Gorek, as well as the Prime Minister. I have something to ask them. That's right. Since the British attitude was what he thought, Carlo planned to take action as soon as possible. Taking advantage of the fact that Italy's remaining power in the Balkans was still there just after the war, let the Balkan countries know Italy's attitude to prevent them from making misjudgments. As Carlo summoned military and political ministers to discuss until midnight, the plan was quickly introduced. The next day, Italy announced that it would conduct naval and army exercises in Kosovo and Aegean Sea. In terms of the content of the exercise, the army quickly dispatched troops to stop conflicts in the area, and the navy blocked maritime transportation and trade in the area. Everyone can understand the meaning of the exercise. It can be said that when Italy announced the naval and army exercises, it represented a strong warning from Italy. In Sofia, Bulgarian military and political officials were worried about the possible situation. When they received the news that Italy announced the exercise, the audience burst into cheers as Bulgaria's foreign minister, Popkov, said excitedly, "Thank you to the Italians for their selfless help." Yes, as foreign minister, Popkov has a very diplomatic vision. He felt something was wrong the first time the Serbs started trouble, and then Greece and the Ottomans quickly followed up, making him worried about Bulgaria's situation, especially after being confused by the attitude of Russia, which was the biggest backer. I felt even more chilled. Even the most radical, the military, had not dared to say that it could defeat possible sieges from several countries before. At most, it could only say that it could use its internal advantages to draw a tie with several countries. It is precisely under this circumstance that Italy stood up for itself strongly, which is why Bulgaria cheered. Being alone and relying on others are treated differently. Amidst the cheers, Stambolov, as Prime Minister, is worthy of the title of Bulgarian Bismarck. he said immediately. With help from Italy, we should immediately respond to each other's kindness and take this opportunity to discuss the railway from Pristina to Sofia with the other party. Our country is willing to raise its own funds to build this railway together with Italy. Yes, what he said is a cliché. Previously, the Prime Minister used the proceeds from the Salonika railway import to lure Italy to stand up for him in order to obtain the entire Macedonia plan. Because in the end, the harvest was not as expected, so it ended in vain, leaving a small crack in the relationship between the two countries. Now Prime Minister Stambolov keenly observes that this is a good opportunity to mend fences with Italy. This opportunity is very likely to win a quasi-ally for Bulgaria. Although this may not necessarily succeed, at least it can buy time for Bulgaria with Italy's tiger skin point. This crisis has caused Bulgaria to cool down a bit from its fanatical national self-confidence. The external environment was so bad that they didn't realize that this mistake needed to be corrected. Just as Bulgaria was reflecting on itself, several other countries that had also received warnings from Italy had the opposite attitude from Bulgaria. As the other party to the conflict, Belgrade is very dissatisfied with Italy's stance. These Italian bastards are like this again. Bulgaria has done so much to make them support these damn Bulgarians so unremittingly. As the favored party in this conflict, Serbian Prime Minister Grujic is now very dissatisfied. He directly cursed in front of a room full of military and political ministers. God knows how much Serbia has paid to unite other countries against Bulgaria. Prime Minister Grujic's heart bleeds every time he thinks of it. Of course, the reason why Serbia paid so much was because it gained more in the plan to deal with Bulgaria, secretly negotiated by several countries. Serbia will get most of the territory that belongs to Macedonia, while Greece, due to its strength and mentality of stealing chickens, will get a small part of the territory that belongs to Macedonia. Southern Macedonia, especially Salonika, is still there, in Ottoman hands. As for the Ottomans, they will obtain the strategic location of Adrianople to protect the capital Istanbul, which is not a loss as for Romania, because Romania has not negotiated the reasons for sending troops. A bit like looking at the food on the side, it has not yet negotiated the conditions for acquiring territory from Bulgaria. As for the major powers that may intervene, each participating country has been responsible for appeasing them, except Italy. The reason for not appeasing Italy is somewhat ridiculous, because Italy's expulsion operations in new territories made all participating countries believe that Italy now has no energy to participate in operations against Bulgaria. Of course, Italy had a good relationship with Bulgaria before. They were worried that they could not come up with the conditions to buy Italy, or they were reluctant to spend a lot of money to buy Italy. If the negotiation failed, the news would be leaked, and they would lose the opportunity. Yes, everyone is betting that Italy will not be able to intervene. However, it is obvious that with Italy's tough statement, the already excellent situation immediately took a turn for the worse. Serbia has begun secret mobilization. However, the Serbs did not intend to just die down. When Italy issued a statement, in addition to complaining, they also wanted to ask their allies for their opinions. After all, if several countries unite, they will have the strength to make the Italians fearful. Serbia has paid so much for this, so it cannot be wasted. What do our friends say now, Prime Minister Grujic asked immediately when he saw the foreign minister hurried over, facing the expectant looks of everyone. Foreign Minister Jeremic said with a frustrated look, Athens' answer to us was that they could not take the risk of war with Italy. Jeremic's words made the crowd wailed. Unexpectedly, Greece was so unintimidated, and they were intimidated by Italy's move. In fact, Greece also has its own difficulties. If you look at the topography of Greece, you will know that Greece is afraid of threats from the sea. Although the Greek navy is very good among the Balkan countries, compared with Italy, it is completely crushed. You must know that Greece's maritime trade is very powerful. If Italy really intervenes, other countries will not know, but Greece will definitely be the one who suffers the most serious losses. The risks involved with little gain are the highest. Anyone with a normal IQ would never do this. If Greek Prime Minister Trikoupis agrees, he will be a true Serbian traitor, burning Greece and lighting up the future for Serbia. Although the Greeks were timid, Prime Minister Grujic still did not give up, and continued to ask, What did the Ottomans say? Facing the Prime Minister's continued questioning, Jeremek's face turned even darker. Istanbul says they don't believe in our capabilities. You read that right. The Ottomans were not optimistic about Serbia's strength. The brave and fearless Serbs in World War I were despised by the Ottomans, who performed even worse at the time point. However, it is normal to put the time to the present. You must know that Serbia has only fought one war before, and that was the Serbia-Bulgaria War. He was beaten violently after a sneak attack from behind. This is why Osman is not optimistic about Serbia. Maybe you can say that I have become different. But what's the use of this? Can you produce any results? If you can't get it out, it's just empty talk. Who can't speak plainly? If 3 companies fought against one Bulgaria, Osman would still be very confident. But if you add Italy, it's a different situation. In the eyes of the Ottomans, if Italy did intervene, it would be nothing more than a replica of previous wars. Serbia and Greece serve as garrisons for the Austrian Balkans, while the Bulgarians only need to garrison Adrianople with heavy troops. Next, it will be up to the Italians to beat the 2 countries to surrender, and then march to Istanbul. Since you have already failed miserably, why try again? Besides, the Ottomans currently have many problems. Since a large number of troops were wiped out in previous wars, the Ottomans also need to rebuild their own armed forces. Although an advisory group has been invited from Germany and the captured soldiers have been released, the loss of a large amount of equipment is a considerable loss, and requires a large amount of money. Tax increases and borrowing are also necessary. There are also doubts about whether the people in the country who are unwilling to bear the heavy burden can accept the tax increase of the noble lord. Borrowing is also a problem. From which country to borrow, how much to borrow, how to allocate the loan, what to use as collateral. A lot of problems involve a lot of energy. In addition, because of this defeat, the tribes in the Arabian Peninsula began to make moves, and many people had other thoughts. These are all things that need to be paid attention to, so it is okay for Osman to play a supporting role and play a supporting role, but forget it if he wants to be the protagonist. On stage. Greece and the Ottomans both retreated, and now the Serbians were really blinded. As the Prime Minister, Jeremek could only say helplessly, send a message and say we are willing to sit down and talk with Bulgaria. Also, I will announce my resignation when this is over. Yes, Serbia has paid so much and gained nothing, and someone needs to be held responsible for this. There is no more suitable candidate than him as Prime Minister. With Serbia's statement, the tense atmosphere over the Balkans was dispersed. Countries have returned to normal, but among them, Italy's weight has increased a bit. Of course, Italy's performance in the Balkans was also noticed by other powers. However, due to various reasons, they are not convenient to stand on the platform, so this crisis will give Italy an opportunity. Therefore, it can be said that Italy became the mediator in the Balkans due to various reasons, but in any case, Italy has contributed to the Balkan people and saved them from the catastrophe of a war, whether they want it or not. Chapter 294 Developments in 1892. With the small flames in the Balkans calmed down, Italy can finally begin to enjoy the fruitful results of the war with all its strength. In Albania and Kosovo, tens of thousands of railway builders are stepping up construction of the Durrës-Pristina railway line. As the most important transportation line in Kosovo and a mountain railway, this railway also adopts the latest construction technology, reinforced concrete pouring technology. Bridge piers and bridges poured with reinforced concrete have greater bearing capacity, higher strength, and sturdiness. It can carry heavier trains, so the emergence of this technology has brought great development to the engineering community. However, although reinforced concrete has various advantages, it is not currently used much around the world. In fact, the technology of reinforced concrete has been around for more than 20 years. In 1868, a French gardener poured the first practical object, a reinforced concrete flower pot. That's right, it's a flower pot. It was not until 1872 that the first reinforced concrete building appeared in New York. As for now, reinforced concrete is not used much, because the reason that restricts the development of reinforced concrete technology is still cost. This technology requires the use of a large amount of steel bars and cement, and the current prices of steel and cement are not cheap. If this technology is adopted on a large scale, it will drive up the cost point. This is also the main reason why reinforced concrete was not used on a large scale before 1900. As for why Italy wants to use this technology on this railway, in the final analysis it is for transportation. Compared with pushing up the cost, the benefits it brings will benefit the development of Italian industry more. The government can still settle this account point. Moreover, the mineral development in Kosovo has made railway construction even more urgent. Currently, there are 3 large coal mines under construction in Kosovo, as well as 1 neutral lead mine, 2 neutral zinc mines, 1 large chromium mine, and 2 silver mines. The development of so many mines is due to the hard work of a large number of geological exploration teams in Kosovo. After the construction of these mines is completed, in addition to rough screening and processing locally, they all need to be transported to the mainland. Without this railway, transportation would be a big problem. Therefore, this railway connecting Durrës and Pristina is currently the most important project of the Italian Ministry of Transport. Tens of thousands of road construction workers are busy here. They used various tools and machinery to build bridges across rivers and roads across mountains. Finally, at the end of 1892, they spent a year and a half to build this artery, which was related to the development of Italian industry. Of course, the Durrës to Pristina railway is not the only railway currently under construction in Italy, and other railways are also under construction. For example, the Sofia-Pristina railway has just completed line exploration. But this railway is mostly built by Bulgarians, and Italy only needs to build a small section in Kosovo. Of course, there is another railway that the Italian government has not forgotten, that is, the railway from Sabha to the Libyan port of Sirte. Although the railway does not have to cross valley rivers, it is more difficult to build than the Durrës-Pristina railway, because it crosses the Sahara. The line surveyors also have a big headache for this railway. They need to avoid desert terrain and try to choose the railway in the Gobi. Otherwise, the railway maintenance workers will cry after a sandstorm. In addition, the choice of site is also a difficult problem. You must know that around the world, tractor engines are still driven by steam engines. This will mean that the trains need to add coal and water. What is the situation in the Sahara? Therefore, in order to reasonably arrange sites and perform daily maintenance work, line exploration is extremely difficult. Fortunately, the hard work over the past year was not in vain, and the line exploration was finally completed. In November 1892, the construction of this railway line for iron ore transportation finally started from the port of Sirte. Of course, the construction of this railway does not attract as much attention as the Balkan Railway, and it also has a lot of time. The 5-year construction period is more than enough for an 800-kilometer railway, even if the railway needs to be built in the Gobi Desert. There was no railway construction in Italy in 1892. The construction of the 3 steel plants in the south, planned by the government, also started at the sites that had already been selected. Thousands of people worked hard for these 3 steel plants as important pillars of the development of the south. The Italian government has also devoted a lot of effort to these 3 steel plants. Italy invested a lot of money and purchased technology from abroad to lay the foundation for the 3 steel plants. It strives to reach a scale of 1.2 million tons of pig iron and 450,000 tons of crude steel in Italy by 1895. Don't look at this steel output, which is not even as good as a small steel plant now. But you only need to compare it with neighboring countries to know that France's current pig iron production is 2 million tons and crude steel is 870,000 tons. Even Germany, which currently has the strongest output in Europe, only produces 4.35 million tons of pig iron and 2.65 million tons of crude steel every year, adding up to a total steel production of only 7 million tons. Italy will not be able to reach Germany's current output for at least 10 years. On the one hand, it is due to raw materials, and on the other hand, it is a market problem. It will be used to produce so much steel. At present, Italy simply cannot afford that much steel, and even the shipbuilding industry, which uses the most materials, cannot share much. Therefore, Italy's current layout in the steel industry is to try its best to let the steel industry drive out steel from other countries. Of course, Italy's light industry has not been forgotten at present, but compared to heavy industry, which can better reflect national strength, the government does not spend much energy on light industry. After all, the capital on hand is too little, and good steel needs to be used on the blade point of course. Large-scale construction also brought another benefit to Italy, that is, Italian immigration fell below the 100,000 mark, an unprecedented drop to 40,000, excluding immigrants to the colonies. This is truly an unprecedented achievement. You must know that Italy used to emigrate more than 100,000 or 200,000 people every year. If there is a disaster year, there will be no problem at all. If there is an impact of 300,000 or 400,000 people. The reason for such large-scale immigration is that Italy cannot retain so many people, or that there is no land to support so many people. The current population of Italy is 31.78 million. Due to Italy's emphasis on family, the annual birth rate is as high as about 3.34%. After deducting the mortality rate of about 2.2%, the natural growth rate is about 1.14%. This means that Italy has an additional population of more than 300,000 people every year. So without immigration, Italy's barren land. Compared to Germany and France, Italian land is really poor, would not be able to support so many people. The reason why the number of immigrants will be reduced this time is not only because industrial development can accommodate more people, but also because Carlo's behavior of expelling new territories gives people more places to go. Traveling across the ocean to earn a living is not as satisfying as settling down nearby. The unkempt land in the new territory was a waste, and naturally it attracted a large number of Italians to flock across the sea. In just over a year, more than 500,000 Italians went to the new territory, immediately occupying all the Albanian territory. As for why there are more than 100,000 more Albanian people, the production and construction of various minerals and the construction of road facilities also require manpower. Of course, Italy's development in 1892 was far more than the above point, and as the bell rang in 1893, a new situation emerged. The title of the previous chapter was repeated. Since I couldn't change it, I mentioned it in this chapter. Chapter 295, Dutch Borneo riots. Italy itself was developing, and of course Borneo as a colony was also developing. Although Governor Antonio is not known for his economics, the good foundation left by the first Governor Caroli is still there. Coupled with the current good world economy and strong exports from Borneo, Italian Borneo's economy is booming. Compared with its next door neighbor Dutch Borneo, it is simply like the sky and the earth. There is no comparison. However, recently the people of Italian Borneo are somewhat concerned about their next door neighbors, but the circumstances of their concern are different. In a tea house, opened by local Chinese in Pontianak, a group of people were chatting with great interest. Did you tell me something happened over there with the red-haired ghost? A man named Chivadan raised troops in Lannoy to resist the rule of the red-haired ghost. I heard that the local government of the red-haired ghost has been defeated. A well-informed person is telling the people around him about the breaking news he knows, and his words immediately attracted the attention of many people. And the red-haired ghosts they naturally refer to the Dutch. Really, that's great. The red-haired ghost is the most hateful. You should learn a lesson now. This Chivadan is a man, a middle-aged man dressed as a businessman immediately praised him after hearing the news. It seems that this person has suffered a loss at the hands of the Dutch, so he made such a statement. But speaking of which, 1/3 of the Chinese in Pontianak came from the Dutch colonies. Few of these people have a good impression of the Dutch. Some prudent people frowned and said something after hearing the news. I'm afraid the red-haired ghost is going to jump now, so won't he send a large army to attack him? We have sent troops a long time ago. It is said that 5 red-haired ghost warships transported thousands of people to the crusade last month. The well-informed person's information was indeed well-informed, and he immediately told them what he knew. Upon hearing this, everyone present stopped talking. It seems like this Chivadan may be in trouble. The only one who said anything was the businessman. It seems that among these Chinese, the red-haired Dutchman is still very majestic. It's not that these Chinese are afraid of the Dutch, but the dignity of the Dutch who have colonized Southeast Asia for hundreds of years cannot be underestimated. Many local chiefs resisted the Dutch before, but in the end the Dutch still ruled here. Therefore, many things cannot be understood until the end. Just when everyone was in the tea shop, Planning to drink tea and talk about other things, a man suddenly rushed in. The latest news is that the Dutch crusade was defeated and only more than 200 people ran back to Samarin. This news shocked everyone in the tea house. Unexpectedly, the Dutch suffered a huge defeat. The red-haired ghost defeated. Tell me what's going on. The previous well-informed person was immediately abandoned, and this one immediately became the focus. Surrounded by stars and stars, seeing everyone's eagerness greatly satisfied this person, and then he continued, I just heard this news, and I don't know if it's true. It's okay, let's talk and listen first. Oh, well, following this explanation, everyone learned that the Dutch army was moving upstream along the Mahakam River, hoping to attack Quirinal, who was hiding deep in the Yilan Mountains, and they were raided and besieged by tens of thousands of rebels in a place called Vatican, more than 80 kilometers west of Lannoy. The expedition team was ultimately defeated, and only more than 200 of the 1,000 people retreated to 3 Merin Point. After listening to the story, the people present were filled with sighs. They did not expect that the Dutch suffered such a big loss. Hearing this, people became worried. I didn't expect this person named Quirinal to be so powerful. Could that be knowing what this person was talking about? Someone immediately retorted, no, the Italians are much more powerful than the red-haired ghosts. I heard that the Italians won a battle in Europa and captured more than 200,000 prisoners. They were so powerful. Besides, the red-haired ghosts can't handle this Quirinal. If replaced by Yaren's army, we will definitely succeed. The rebuttal immediately resonated with everyone. Many people have their businesses here, so you can't scare yourself. So he immediately transformed into Zhuge Liang and directed the country. That's right. If Quirinal can win, it's because the red-haired ghost is going against the will of the people. If he dares to come to our side, he will be seeking death. While the people in the city were surprised by the Dutch defeat, Antonio in the governor's palace was also concerned about the battle point. However, unlike the Daosheng people, Antonio has more detailed information. The Dutch army had 217 killed and 531 wounded and captured. So there were only more than 200 people who escaped back. Antonio looked at the man in front of him who was wearing civilian clothes, but looked like a soldier, and asked, yes, your majesty the governor. The Dutch suffered very high losses in this battle. Hearing the result, Antonio nodded with satisfaction. So, what about the loss of Ziwarden's men? It's not good. In the Battle of Tabukan, more than 600 people were killed in Quirinal, more than 300 people were seriously injured, and more than 400 people were slightly injured. At present, it has reduced its strength by more than 40%. So this time I will not only come back. In addition to the report, Ziwarden also wants us to provide a batch of medicines. That's right, Antonio was the mastermind behind the riots in Dutch Borneo, who told the Dutch to hold on to the Borneo territory and not let go. No matter how much he tried to persuade them, it had no effect. If that's the case, don't blame him for Antonio's dirty tricks. After more than a year of planning, now let Kitsiniaya, governor of Jakarta, have the headache. I hope the new governor of Jakarta likes this gift. You can give it to him, but the quantity shouldn't be too much. It can only be enough for his troops. You can take it with you when you return. Antonio agreed to Ziwarden's request point, but since we have taken supplies from Italy, we need to do something. And then Antonio continued, in addition, when I go back, I will tell Ziwarden that, since he has defeated the Dutch army that attacked him, he should take advantage of this window period to develop vigorously. Tambalan, Malinao, and Tarakan can all be the scope of expansion. The place names Antonio mentioned are all in northern Borneo. Although the population here is not large and the area is sparsely populated, it is still helpful to expand its power. Okay, Governor, I will advise Ziwarden to develop towards it when I get back. But before he left, Antonio suddenly asked, what do you think of this Ziwarden? As Antonio's choice to carry out the riot, how could he not know who Ziwarden is? I'm asking now just to know if his attitude has changed. After all, people will change, especially as their strength develops. He is afraid that some people will have any thoughts that they shouldn't have. Point in response to the governor's inquiry, the officer replied, before I came back, Chiverton and most of his subordinates treated us with respect. Okay, go ahead and do your work. After sending away the officer who served as a staff officer next to the warden, Antonio started writing. For this kind of thing, he needed to ask his old friend about the recent situation in Rome. As a man who cared about the kingdom, Antonio was still very concerned about the situation in Rome. Chapter 296 Misjudgment. Riots in Borneo, especially in Dutch territories, were of no concern to Rome. For the Roman government, current domestic developments are even more concerning. However, compared with the government, King Carlo has been a little different recently. He is going to wander around the country. No, go on a tour in the Andessa shipyard on the side of the Genoa port. Military and police gathered together today, and spies were intensive. The workers at the shipyard knew without guessing that a big shot would be visiting today. Their guess was correct. King Carlo I and Admiral Largile, Minister of the Navy, came to inspect. The Admiral became Yaji. But what about Admiral Gorek? An error needs to be supported here. The former Navy Minister Golek was not an admiral. 3 days before his retirement, this old man who had spent most of his life fighting for the Navy finally became a marshal. Marshal Gorek sounds much better than General Gorek. Of course, in addition to the actual benefits of Golek's honor, the Navy also benefited a lot, because the Navy did not have a field marshal before, which made the Navy officers and soldiers feel a little less confident in front of the Army. Now that both the Navy and the Army have marshals, no one can blame the other. Although the Navy's is a retired marshal, he is still a marshal. Okay, let's put aside the honor aspect and talk about something practical. In this year's military budget, the proportion of funds occupied by the Navy has set a new record, reaching 41.4% of the total military expenditure. With such a high ratio, in addition to the reduction in Army funding due to layoffs in the Army, the Navy's original savings from cutting personnel and tonnage have not been reduced much because of updated equipment. This time, Carlo and the new Navy Minister, Admiral Yagia, came to inspect the refitted warship. It is said to be a modification, but in fact it is just to replace the cannon of the warship. Didn't we successfully develop rapid fire guns before? Now that there are new guns, the old naval guns should be replaced. Although this costs a lot of money, it is still lower than the cost of a newly built warship. Your Majesty, please see, this is the Brescia armored cruiser that we are currently undergoing modifications. We are currently renovating the ship, and at the same time enhancing its structural strength. Argel pointed to a tall warship in the dock, and introduced it to Carlo. Carlo looked up, and saw that the Brescia was already covered with tripods. After boarding the ship, the most eye-catching thing was the two eye-catching large holes that stood out in it. Admiral Yager on the side pointed at the big hole and said, "Your Majesty, this was originally the installation location for the Brescia's first level main gun. Due to the emergence of new rapid-fire naval guns, the Navy can only keep up with the times. The main gun currently being reinstalled for the Brescia is a 2-unit 42, a new 203mm naval gun, which was manufactured by Tabuto Naval Arsenal. Currently, Admiral Yager explained the selection of new naval guns in detail. In fact, the Navy is actually very resistant to replacing the main guns of the two cruise ships with 8-inch guns, but it's impossible not to replace it. The new naval gun is more powerful, has stronger recoil, and has a faster rate of fire. Of course, this also leads to a heavier tonnage of the new naval gun, which places new requirements on the strength of the warship. The design department suggested that the double tube should be replaced by a single tube, or the caliber would have to be changed. In the end, the Navy was still reluctant to bear the dual installation, and had no choice but to change the caliber, so the 203mm caliber became the only option. This can be regarded as a realistic compromise. After Admiral Yaji finished speaking, Carlo looked at the battleship being refitted in front of him and said, "When will the modification be completed?" The modification should be completed within the year. The modification of the 3 Turin-class ships is relatively simple, because only the second-level main gun and other artillery need to be replaced, and the most important first-level main gun will not be moved. The main reason is that the modification of the 2 patrol ships is relatively simple. Trouble, they will be replaced inside and out. In fact, according to our Navy's thinking, the cost of replacing the guns of 2 Venice-class cruisers is better than investing in the research and development of new cruisers. The cost of such modification is almost half the cost of a cruiser. Well, Carlo directly filtered out the second half of what Admiral Yaji said. The Navy has always wanted to patrol with new equipment, from the predecessor Garlic to the current Admiral Yaji. They've been working on it. But this is of no use, because it is impossible for the government to come up with the money. The government's goals in recent years have been very clear. At present, there is no external pressure on Italy to reduce military spending and use the money for debt repayment and domestic development. You must know that last year, the government saved 150 million liras due to the reduction of military spending. Wouldn't it be nice to invest this money in industry or developed colonies? How many things can this solve? Therefore, taking advantage of the peaceful environment, it is extremely difficult for the government to open its mouth. Admiral Yaja also knows this, but no matter how difficult it is for him as the new Lord of the Navy, he must fight for it. Otherwise, wouldn't it be embarrassing for the Navy to fail to achieve any results after taking office? So taking advantage of the opportunity to travel with the king, he wanted to start directly with Carlo. The Navy will never forget the origin of the Venice-class outfit patrol. If it weren't for the royal family's funding, how would they know how good the outfit patrol was? This may make the king feel compassionate and allow the Navy to once again have free shipbuilding funds. However, Admiral Yaji, or rather the Navy, had a good idea, but they did not consider the reality. What was the situation then, and what is the situation now? If it really goes to the Navy, what will the army do? Besides, the royal family's money doesn't come from strong winds, so it can't be said that it exists. Therefore, Carlo ignored the meaning of Admiral Agile's words and continued. The modification time should be as soon as possible. You still need to give the officers and soldiers time to adapt again. Carlo's words gave Admiral Yaji a strange smell. Being in such a hurry means that the king needs to use the Navy for something. As long as the Navy can be used, this is a good thing. Is it Borneo or somewhere else? Admiral Yaji's brain was working very fast at this time, and he was analyzing the king's purpose. Carlo, who had no idea what his words were revealing, glanced at the Minister of the Navy next to him. Admiral Yagia, your Navy's ocean-going training needs to be strengthened next. The Italian Navy can't just stay in the Mediterranean, but it must also go out and let others see it. Admiral Yagia, who had no idea yet, could only put down his inner thoughts and said, Your Majesty, our Navy already has a plan, and we plan to communicate with the Argentine Navy after the modification is completed. Carlo was a little surprised when faced with Admiral Yaji's words. Argentina, yes, Your Majesty, it is Argentina, yes. There are currently frequent exchanges between Argentina and Italy. Not only do the two countries have naval vessels from the same family, but Argentina is also the #1 destination for Italian immigrants. Yes, in this era, Argentina, with its vast territory and sparsely populated land and fertile land, is simply the first choice for immigrants from Italy. Argentina also very much welcomes the arrival of Italian immigrants. Although the relationship between the two countries cannot be called an alliance, it is still very close. Let's change it to Borneo. The Italian Navy will go to Borneo for some training first, and then go to Argentina next time. As soon as Carlo opened his mouth, he asked the Navy to change places, which strengthened Admiral Yagia's judgment that the next task of the Navy was to seize Dutch Borneo. Yes, as the head of the Navy, Admiral Yagia is certainly aware of the current little moves of Antonio, the governor of Borneo. After all, the Navy also has a small fleet in Borneo, so how can it not know what is happening there? As long as you know the goal, it will be easier. Admiral Yagia is already thinking in his heart that he can use this opportunity to contribute to the Navy. Chapter 297 Guards Organization. Admiral Yagi's misjudgment is irrelevant at all, or in other words, Admiral Yaji did not misjudge. As the uprising in Dutch Borneo intensified during the period when the Dutch were mobilized after the defeat, Zeeuwarden's power expanded greatly. Inland towns such as Longbourn, Longbo, Bursa, and Ujabina were all occupied by it. As their sphere of influence expanded, their number also increased dramatically, reaching more than 13,000 people. The Dutch, who failed last time, stepped up their deployment of troops. According to rumors, this time the Dutch became ruthless and planned to mobilize 5,000 troops. to conquer the Quirinal rebel forces who had made them lose face. The actions of the Dutch were seen by the Italians as neighbors. As an example of a good neighbor, Governor Antonio was also very concerned about the Dutch. In the governor's palace in Pontianak, an official was reporting to him on the attitude of the Dutch. Your Majesty, the governor of Kitchener in Jakarta rejected our request. He said that the Dutch army can cope with the current situation, and the Dutch colonial government will compensate our businessmen for the losses suffered in this riot. After hearing the Dutch's reply, Antonio said without changing his expression, "I understand, go down." After the official left, Antonio touched his forehead and sighed. "I made a mistake. I didn't expect the Dutch to be so stubborn. It seemed that Borneo's strength alone would not suffice." Yes, Antonio underestimated the determination of the Dutch, or in other words, the determination of the new governor, Kitchener. It was also Antonio's bad luck. Unlike his predecessor, the newly appointed Dutch governor was a rare die-hard nationalist who would rather suffer a loss than let others have an easy time. Antonio's disastrous plan to help the Dutch wipe out the rebel forces was directly rejected by the new governor. But then again, how could the Dutch not get any wind of Italy's sneaky behavior over the years? In the past, given Italy's strength, it could only turn a blind eye. But with the emergence of the Zworden rebellion, the Dutch were even more unable to allow Italian troops to appear in their colonies. Of course, Antonio did not have other options, but these methods all required the help of Rome, and he had not wanted to use the power of Rome before, because it would not show his ability. But now that he encounters a stubborn governor of Jakarta, Antonio will not be stubborn at this time. Flexible change of strategy is the choice of a good politician. Of course, Antonio can also increase his support, but this option is not feasible. This would make Italy an outlier among the colonists. You must know that, although countries use all kinds of methods when fighting for colonies, some methods can be done, but cannot be said, and some methods cannot be said or done. Things like Antonio's support of colonial riots in other countries are things that cannot be said, but can only be done. Of course, there are some differences in what can only be done. Evidence cannot be caught. This is an iron rule. Not doing so will disgrace him and Italy. Moreover, expanding support for rebels is also taboo in Southeast Asia. Although it is not illegal, it is a foul act. Small-scale funding does not count, but large-scale funding does not count. Thinking of this, Antonio took out a pen and paper and prepared to write a letter. After a while, he sealed the letter and handed it to his secretary. Arrangements will be made to have this letter sent to Rome. Antonio did not plan to send the news by telegraph for the sake of confidentiality. Instead, he used a communication ship to send the news to Rome. Anyway, this matter is not that urgent. Confidentiality is the first priority point. While Antonio was having a headache for the Dutch at home, after Carlo inspected the navy, his next stop was the guards barracks on the outskirts of Rome. Standing in rows, the upright guards officers and soldiers stood with their heads high and their chests raised, waiting intently for the king and military bosses who were inspecting them to pass by. Very good. The officers and soldiers are very energetic. Carlo looked at the guards officers and soldiers lined up and praised the guards commander Lieutenant General Grove with satisfaction. "Your Majesty praised me. The reason why the officers and soldiers of the guards are what they are today is because of His Majesty's concern." Carlo inspected the guards for a very important reason. That is, the guards was finally promoted from a division level unit to a corps level unit. The guards finally had a division level subordinate to them. The 1st Guards Division currently visited by Carlo was the newly reorganized unit. The 1st Guards Division was adapted from the 1st and 3rd Guards Regiments and the 1st Brigade of the 2nd Marine Division. At present, the 1st Guards Division has 1 fully formed infantry regiment, 2 underformed regiments, 1 Schalf regiment with only officers, as well as artillery regiment, transportation regiment, engineer battalion, communications company, gendarmerie and other ancillary units. At present, the guards there are a total of 11,359 officers and soldiers in the 1st Division, which is a gap of more than 5,000 compared to the full complement of 16,451 officers at present. It has not been completed that there is not much difference in the number of the 2nd Division and the 1st Division. They are both in a state of dissatisfaction. In fact, the current state of the guards is basically the same as that of the Italian army. Regarding the requirement to reduce the total strength of the army, senior army officials such as Army Secretary Field Marshal Cadorna and Chief of General Staff General Simeon are in favor of compressing each unit to a reduced level, rather than dismantling the entire unit. At present, in addition to the guards, the army has 21 infantry divisions, 4 cavalry divisions, 6 mountain brigades, as well as heavy artillery, garrison and other units. If full strength is used, the total strength of these troops should be as high as 430,000, while the current total strength of the army, excluding the guards, is only 210,000. Reducing the strength by half depends entirely on reducing the actual strength of each unit. At present, the Italian army is divided into 3 situations. One is a standing division with 2 full infantry regiments, 2 less than full infantry regiments, and other affiliated units. This kind of division is currently the best unit in the army. It is also given priority in terms of weapons and equipment. It is also the fist of the army. Currently, there are only 3 such standing divisions under the army, and they are basically placed on the Italian-French border. In addition to this kind of standing division, that can be brought to the battlefield at any time, there are also things like the 1st Guards Division, which has 1 fully formed regiment, 2 unsatisfied regiments, and a shelf regiment with only officers, and then add other affiliated troops also. Number tens of thousands of divisions. There are 9 such divisions in the army, and they are called standard divisions. They only need to recruit enough soldiers and simply train them, and their combat effectiveness will not be much worse than that of standing divisions. Of course, standard masters are also different. The best standard masters can reach more than 12,000 people, and some have only 10,000 people, which is less than 10,000. The reason for this gap is dissatisfaction with the differences in the formation of regiments. Some are only in the squad or reduced from 10 people in a squad to 7, and some will be reduced at the battalion level into a shelf battalion. These are called dissatisfied with the infantry regiment. Most of the cavalry and mountain brigades also adopt this model. Then there is the most simplified division in the army. This kind of division has only 2 infantry regiments that are not fully staffed. The other 2 infantry regiments are shelf regiments. In addition, the artillery and other ancillary units have also been reduced. For example, the 15th Division is such a simplified division. Compared with a standard division such as the 1st Guards Division, the 1st Guards Division is fully staffed in the artillery regiment, and its 3 subordinate artillery battalions are all fully staffed. It is equipped with 72 artillery pieces. Although the calibers are somewhat different, including 105mm guns, 80mm and 57mm guns, the number of artillery pieces will not be small. The 15th Division has only 2 full artillery battalions, and 1 shelf battalion, which has only more than 50 artillery pieces. This kind of simplified division is also an emergency establishment adopted by the army in view of the current low external pressure. The troops and some equipment were reduced and expanded before the war came. Although it is much inferior to the standing and standard divisions, it is much better than the temporarily recruited mobilization divisions. It only needs to be given a month of training time, and its combat effectiveness will not drop too much. Carlo certainly supports the downsizing plan proposed by the army. Although it seems that the generals and squadrons are divided into 3 levels, it is actually the same in all European countries. Except for a few troops, this approach is adopted, but it is not as severe as the Italian compression. Inspecting the expansion of the guards was just a small matter for Carlo. After watching it, he spoke to General Simeon, the Chief of General Staff who was accompanying him. When will we arrange a military exercise to see how the army's combat effectiveness is maintained? Faced with Carlo's words, how could Simeon, as the Chief of General Staff, refuse? He said, according to the General Staff's plan, we will conduct division-level confrontation exercises in the second half of the year. After hearing what Admiral Simeon said, Carlo suddenly asked, has the place been chosen? Carlo's words moved Simeon. Your Majesty, do you have a choice? How about East Africa? Carlo's words made him stunned. He didn't understand what His Majesty meant by these words. East Africa is possible, but the distance is long and unnecessary costs will be added. Yes, Simeon feels that going to East Africa for exercises is a bit wasteful. There are so many people and equipment, and the shipping cost alone is a lot of money. Moreover, the foundation in East Africa is very poor. The officers and soldiers had to adapt to the environment in the past. Isn't it a bit redundant? Faced with Simeon's doubts, Carlo immediately explained. Recently Menelik II asked us for help, and the Sudanese invaded the granary of Lake Tana in Abyssinia. We need to at least make some gestures to help them. That's right, the Sudanese and the Abyssinians are fighting again. Every now and then, the two countries will fight over the rich land of Lake Tana, without even breathing. Menelik II, the Abyssinian emperor, also had a headache about this. However, Lake Tana is related to nearly 20% of Abyssinia's grain output. There is nothing we can do to lose it in our own hands. We have no choice but to bite the bullet. In fact, the Sudanese people next door are also having a hard time. Frequent droughts and wars have kept the Sudanese people in a state of hunger. At present, the only people around who can grab a handful, and with good reason, are the Abyssinians. What else is there to say? Just take your livestock, wife, and children and go to an Abyssinian house for dinner. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298, Preparations for War in the Far East. While Carlo was patrolling the Navy and Army, Japan in the Far East was also holding a secret meeting. At present, the Ministry of Finance has allocated 710,000 yen to France for the third phase of the purchase of the Sankei ship, 1.87 million yen for the second phase of the purchase of the Yoshino and Satomi ships to the United Kingdom, and has also allocated 1.87 million yen for the artillery unit of the newly established 6th Division of the Army. The artillery payment is 680,000 yen, and the current balance of the special account is 470,000 yen. In addition, the Ministry of Finance needs to allocate the first batch of 2.01 million yen for the Fuji and Yashima ships next month. As the Chief Steward of Japan's finances, Minister of Finance Watanabe Kunitake was reporting on expenditures to a group of senior Japanese officials at the imperial meeting. The meaning of having no money is very clear in his words. When he told the balance of the special account, everyone at the scene immediately frowned, and the thought of having no money flashed across his mind. Especially when it comes to the remaining expenses, many people can't help but pat themselves on the head. Yes, although Japan has undergone modernization reforms, and its income has increased significantly, its expenses are also not cheap. Of course, with the help of some caring people, Japan's current spending is much higher than in history. Of course, the inertia of history is very strong, and the famous Sanjing ship still exists. This ship is aimed at the calming second ship. However, the Sanjing ship is still a wonder in the history of shipbuilding. The more than 4,000-ton warship carries a 320mm cannon, which is simply a model of a small boat carrying a cannon. And if you look carefully, you will find that the Sankei ship is divided into two types. The main gun is front-mounted and the main gun is rear-mounted. Its Sakashima and Tatehashi have front-mounted main guns, while Matsushima has the rear-mounted main gun point. If its Sakashima and Matsushima were grouped together, would there be a battleship with two 320mm guns? The Japanese Navy really came up with a brilliant idea due to lack of funds. Originally there was supposed to be a 3-view ship forming 2 formations. But unfortunately, the Japanese later ran out of money and the 4th ship was cancelled. Of course, this is why, after the Japanese came to their senses, they ordered 2 more first-class battleships, Fuji and Yashima. Of course, the construction of these 2 warships has just begun. It will take only 3 or 4 years to complete them, which is simply impossible. In addition, history is also different. As for Japan's current purchase of 2 British Yoshino Hayami cruise ships, the cost is much higher than in history. Compared with the 3,000-4,000 ton cruisers in history, the 2 cruisers currently purchased by Japan from the British have nothing in common, except that their names are the same as in history. Its tonnage reaches more than 8,000 tons, has up to 16,000 horsepower, and has a maximum speed of 19 knots. It is equipped with 4 twin 256mm main guns, 6 152-barreled guns plus 8 120mm barreled guns, and 20 the 47mm small caliber cannon can completely suppress the Peng Gang second ship in terms of speed and firepower, and can even compete with the Venetian class currently equipped by the Italian Navy. Of course, the cost is also very high. The cost of 2 ships is £1.31 million. Without discount point, this price is very difficult for Japan at the moment. Haven't you seen that even the emperor only eats 1 meal a day? After listening to the words of the Tibetan Prime Minister, Dashanan, as the Minister of War, immediately spoke. I ran out of money so quickly. I didn't just borrow 10 million yen. There is a reason why Dashanan asked this. The army's original plan was to prepare 8 divisions before the war to fight against the king troops. But the army has just completed the formation of the 6th division. There is no money. How should the next 2 divisions be formed? Although the government has been borrowing money, it is best to let the government implement the borrowing now just in case. The words of the Minister of War immediately attracted the echo of the Minister of Navy Seigo Yumichi. Yes, the coming period will be critical for the army and navy, so there cannot be a shortage of money. Although everyone knows the relationship between Japan's army and navy, it is still rare to cooperate when it comes to money. Besides, funding is even more important to the navy. How many warships, how many cannons, and what calibers there are, all require money. When a big ship fights a small ship, the threat of large caliber is greater than that of small caliber, and it will not change with the change of personnel. Faced with the statements of the army and navy, Prime Minister Ito Hirobumi said, Otani-kun and Seigo-kun, please be patient. The government is already negotiating with the British for new loans. When the money comes in, the funding problem will be solved for you, as if to strengthen the confidence of the 2 army and navy ministers. Foreign Minister Matsumune Mitsu then took up the topic and continued. Currently, our country is negotiating with the British for a large loan of 50 million yen. We are almost at the end of the negotiation, and it should be finalized next month. Yes, the Japanese government is indeed negotiating with the Bank of England for a loan of 5,000 yen, but it is not as easy as he said. For this money, the British asked for a relatively high price and asked the Japanese government to use mineral taxes as collateral. As we all know, Japan is a country with a lot of gold and silver mines. In addition to exclusive mining of these gold and silver mines, the Japanese government also sets a very high mineral tax, which can reach more than 7 million yen in tax revenue every year. The premise that the British bank is willing to lend this money is to focus on this money. Of course, for Japan, almost all of the tax revenue it can mortgage has been mortgaged. Tariffs, field taxes, etc. have long been mortgaged. The most valuable thing in my hand right now is a mineral tax. Now, in order to expand the military and prepare for war, this most valuable tax also needs to be put on the counter for mortgage. Now that he is going to be rich again, the 2 ministers of land and sea naturally have nothing to say. But at this time, the Grand Priest, Watanabe Kunatake, stood up again. Everyone, let me say one more thing. According to the Ministry of Finance's estimates, if the current expenditure continues, Japan's finances can support it for up to 2 years. So I hope the Navy and Army will be ready as soon as possible, please. The words of the Tibetan Prime Minister immediately lowered the atmosphere that had just been restored. However, there is no other way. Japan is too small and has only so much fiscal revenue. It has done its best to prepare for war. If it is delayed for a long time, Japan is destined to go bankrupt. When facing Watanabe Kunatake, the 2 Navy and Army ministers immediately replied, please rest assured, Mr. Watanabe, we will complete preparations for war as soon as possible. As Prime Minister, Ito Hirobumi certainly knew that the government was about to be unable to survive. For this reason, he had already ordered the ambassador to North Korea not to worry about the attitudes of North Korea and the King people. Yes, Japan now needs to find ways to stir up trouble. While Japan was trying every means to expand its armaments, Li Zhantang, the first governor of the Qing dynasty, was also looking at a submission in the Zili governor's mansion in Tianjin. This submission was jointly submitted by Biang Navy Admiral Ding Ruchang and Biang General Council Rear Admiral Antonio, requesting that the Biang fleet warships be replaced with rapid-fire guns. Since it was to replace the cannon, it would cost money. Although the report about the rapid-fire cannon was very glamorous, the cost of replacing the cannon still made Li Zhantang hesitant. The reason is simple, because it costs 730,000 taels of silver to replace the cannon. It is normal for Li Zhantang to be hesitant about this expense. Although in the report, the General Council from Italy said that the Japanese Navy next door was becoming Biang's inner enemy, Li Zhantang was well informed. How could he not know that this was a way to get money, and it was all left over by him. Japan is a small country with few people, and it is our opponent to the Great Qing dynasty. If it were not to avoid extraneous problems, we would not let it have an easy time in Taiwan. Of course, if it were just these, Li Zhantang wouldn't be able to give it to him, because of his hard work and merit. But Master Zhantang is also in a dilemma. In recent years, it has become increasingly difficult for Zhantang and Zhantang to get money from the court. Although there are still 2.6 million taels of silver in the bank, this money is not that easy to use. In addition, Li Zhantang also needs to repay the Queen Mother's garden repairs. There are more than 100,000 soldiers in Biang, and they are all related to him. With his family's fortune growing, it will be difficult for him. However, after thinking about it again and again, Li Zhantang sighed and wrote the word OK on the submission. Finally, the Biang fleet also began to replace its rapid-fire guns. Although I don't know how much this can improve, it has finally changed. Of course, Major General Antonio, as the general advisor, played a role to some extent. Chapter 299 Diesel. Although the actions of China and Japan in the Far East are attractive enough, for now, their impact on Italy is not significant. Although Italy has considerable interests in the Far East, the most important thing for Italy is still its homeland. As the King of Italy, Carlo still found time to learn about the affairs of other countries in his busy schedule, and the channels for him to learn about it were not only the news sent back by the ambassadors to various countries, but also the newspapers of various countries. Damn it, how could I forget about him? Carlo was holding a German newspaper, looking at a small piece of news on it, and suddenly shouted. This newspaper was from a few days ago, but there was only a short paragraph of news that caught Carlo's attention. An explosion occurred in Augsburg today. It is said that a man named Diesel was developing a new engine. But what kind of engine it was? It needed to cause an explosion that resounded throughout the city. Could it be that this man was researching, is it an engine started by explosives? If you want to know more information, please look forward to tomorrow's report. Carlo was not looking forward to the cause of the explosion in Augsburg. He was concerned about the man named Diesel. Because of this name, it has a lot to do with diesel engines. The German word diesel comes from his name. Thinking of this, Carlo picked up the phone and said, "Let the captain of the guard investigate the full name of Diesel who caused the explosion in Augsburg." Yes, Carlo wants to investigate this man named Diesel. Don't blame Carlo for not remembering names. After more than 20 years of time, how can he know people's names anytime and anywhere? Not to mention knowing his deeds. There are no more than 10 people in Carlo's mind who were treated like this. These people are all famous figures. It's not like this guy's called Adolf Hitler, so why does he always occupy his memory? He is not a computer and can remember everyone's names all the time. It was pretty good that he could think of the inventor of the diesel engine when he saw this name in the newspaper. This can be considered one of the reasons why Carlo likes to read newspapers. It can trigger his memories of past lives through reports in newspapers from various countries. Of course, Diesel can't rush this matter. He will investigate first before deciding whether to invite the other party. Of course, even if Diesel doesn't accept the invitation, I believe there are never too many sponsors for every inventor. Although Diesel's matter is important, it is not particularly urgent. There are many more important matters than this, such as Italy's rectification of the financial sector. Since the establishment of the National Bank of Italy, Italy's banking industry has had an additional supervisor. The National Bank, which has the status of a central bank, is more to make the Italian banking industry more standardized. In the past 3 years, the National Bank has punished 924 bank violations and dealt with 327 violators, gradually standardizing the chaotic banking industry. Of course, this is just one of the many businesses of the National Bank. For the National Bank, he has more important things, such as supervising the banking and financial industry, and will also gradually withdraw some banknotes. This can be regarded as remedial work for the previous government's excess of banknotes, but the National Bank has done a very good job and is gradually recovering a lot of market funds by using its status as a supervisor and regulator as the most direct manifestation. The Italian legal currency lira gradually stopped falling and rebounded in the foreign exchange market from the lowest of 27.218 lira to £1 and gradually rose to 26.375 to £1, although it has not yet risen to the 25.236 lira per pound announced by the government. At least the momentum is good. Moreover, the Italian financial industry can develop healthily under the supervision of the National Bank. Just last year, the Italian banking industry lent up to 3.27 billion lire to the private sector, an increase of 5.79% over the previous year. Among them, private industrial loans reached 1.395 billion liras, an increase of 7.36% over the previous year, and helped the industry achieve a growth of 11.27%. In addition, it has created more than 100,000 jobs and benefited more than 600,000 people. We can see from bank lending that Italy's industry is accelerating, which is a very surprising thing. This also shows that after so many years, private enterprises and factories have gradually grown and developed. Although there are many problems in private enterprises and factories, such as tax evasion and low wages for workers, just like in later generations, they still have a good promotion effect on Italy's economic development. Relying solely on state-owned enterprises or large enterprises, the Italian economy is likely to reach a stalemate. As Carlo, who has the memory of later generations, of course he also knows this, so, after reading this National Bank report, he finally felt relieved about the financial industry. Of course, this is only temporary reassurance, and he is aware of the greed of the financial industry, but the financial industry can neither let go nor be stuck. To get it just right, this requires the unremitting efforts of many regulators, including the National Bank. Just when Carlo wanted to continue looking at other documents on the table, there was a knock on the door. Then a beautiful figure appeared in front of him. It was Carlo's wife, Queen Maria. Maria, who still had a girlish look in her eyes, was wearing casual clothes, but her slightly bulging belly could not be covered at all. Yes, Carlo's little wife is pregnant. If in future generations, Carlo would be denounced by thousands of people if he allowed a 16-year-old girl to become pregnant. But in this era, there are not so many things to pay attention to, and in the Far East, there are a lot of people who are 13 or 14 years old and have children. But although no one would say anything, Carlo still loved and cared for his girlish wife. What's wrong, Maria? Carlo stepped forward and asked his wife concernedly. It's nothing, I'm just feeling bored. Didn't mother accompany you? Facing her husband Carlo's words, Maria put her hands on her cheeks and looked at him. But mother is not you. Well, in the end the problem still falls on Carlo himself. However, if you think about it, you will know that a 15-year-old girl is a new mother. She does not have many friends in Rome, and she is pregnant. Naturally, what she needs most is the care of her husband Carlo. However, as a king, Carlo had a lot of things to do every day, and the time he could take care of his wife was very short. This can be regarded as an apology from his wife Maria. Well, how about we go out for a walk tomorrow? Where do you want to go? Maria was very satisfied with Carlo's satisfactory answer. That's it. Let me think about where to go tomorrow. I'll let you know when I think about it. After getting the result she wanted, Maria left Carlo's office. Carlo looked at the documents on the table and smiled bitterly. It looks like the files are piling up again. While work is important, family must also be taken care of. Chapter 300, The Emperor's Ambition. In the autumn, the East African land is dry and rainless, and the withered yellow color looks so decayed. However, in this dry land, two waves of officers and soldiers are fighting hard. If you look carefully, you will find that except for the differences in military uniforms, the weapons and equipment of these two waves of officers and soldiers are basically the same. Yes, it was at Carlo's suggestion that the Italian Army's autumn exercises were moved to East Africa. Currently conducting exercises are the 8th Army Division and the 1st Guards Division. The 8th Division is a very combat-effective unit among the Army's standard divisions, and the 1st Guards Division is needless to say. The confrontation between the two division-level units is very interesting. It is precisely for this reason that in addition to attracting the attention of the Italian military itself, this exercise also attracted other guests. For example, the Abyssinian generals and the Emperor Menelik II watched. Of course, it is not known how much they can understand. As the top general who watched this exercise, the experienced General Simeon did not finish watching it, but he put down the high-power telescope. After watching it for a while, the result of this battle is obvious. The 1st Guards Division performed very well, but the 8th Division will not be able to hold it anymore. Simeon's words made Major General Pascal, the commander of the 8th Division, look ashamed. Faced with the accusations from his old superiors, what could he say? The next step was to increase training and learn from failures. As for the praised 1st Guards Division, Major General Pilev, as the division commander, was not overjoyed. He also saw the shortcomings of the 1st Guards Division in this high-quality exercise. As for the Abyssinians who were watching, many of them looked at it with blank faces. They only knew that both sides of the exercise were well trained, and both the offensive and defensive sides played very well. The Abyssinian army, whether defensive or offensive, is far from an opponent. Many Abyssinian generals privately estimate that if they want to prevent the attacks of the two Italian armies, at least 60,000 people will be needed, and the number of artillery, machine guns and other equipment must reach the same number as the other side. As for the attack, it is simply impossible with less than 100,000 people. Of course, this is just a guess. Whether it will work or not will only be known after actual testing. Of course, with Abyssinia's strength, it is impossible to have this strength, let alone the idea. Simeon's prediction was very accurate. After a while, cheers came from the exercise ground. The 1st Guards Division broke through the defensive position of the 8th Division, announcing that the result of the exercise was the victory of the 1st Guards Division. Faced with this result, Major General Pascal, the commander of the 8th Division, became even darker. This exercise was divided into two parts. The 8th Division attacked, and the 1st Guards Division defended. Then the two divisions changed their identities and started again. Of course, if you act on the offensive side, you will get some beneficial supplements, such as increasing some supporting firepower. However, the 8th Division failed to defeat the 1st Guards Division this time, whether offensively or defensively. This made him, the division commander, feel discouraged. Of course, he wouldn't show it in front of everyone. I saw Major General Pascal walking in front of Major General Pilev with a forced smile. Our 8th Division is heartily convinced that we lost in this exercise. I hope we can get another chance to compete with your division next time. Faced with Major General Pascal's unyielding spirit, Major General Pilev replied with a smile. Your teacher also performed very well, but this time it was just bad luck. I hope we can continue to meet in the next competition. After the two teachers had a brief exchange, the next step was the summary meeting. The group left the observation platform and came to a simple conference room. As the commander-in-chief of this exercise, General Simeon was the first to speak out, pointing out the shortcomings of the two participating units. However, in general, the victorious 1st Guards Division had fewer shortcomings, while the 8th Division had more points pointed out. The generals who were observing the scene took out their notebooks and kept writing down Simeon's words. These people are basically the chief officers of each army. Even if they are not the first in command, they are the second in command. Everyone knows military skills, so they naturally know the gap between their own troops and the two troops in the exercise. It can be said that except for the only 3 standing divisions in Italy, no other force can be said to be stronger than the 2 forces in the exercise. Perhaps the 3 standing divisions are not as good as the 2 exercise units in some aspects. Now that you know your shortcomings, what are you waiting for? If you don't learn with an open mind, should he wait until the army assessment, give himself an unqualified evaluation, and then leave the army in despair? That's right, the army now needs to conduct assessments for each unit, in order to prevent the emergence of unprogressive unit officers. Although you can't meet the result of retiring after just 1 assessment, if you fail 3 times in a row, you will really be forced to retire. This is specially marked in red letters on the assessment standards issued by the army. The summary meeting chaired by General Simeon lasted for half an afternoon, and many suggestions were given, based on practical problems. When he saw the generals taking notes, a smile appeared on his face. Because this army department assessment regulation was issued at his suggestion. The reason for him to do this was that the Italian generals were too idle. That's right, it's just too idle. The chief of staff is responsible for daily training, but the division commanders and corps commanders basically don't care enough about the troops other than asking about the situation of the troops. Of course, there are only a few like him who spend most of their time in the military. Simeon believes that the reason why many factions were formed in the army before was because the generals were too idle and made trouble. It's easy for your mind to wander when you're free, and it's easy to make mistakes. Only keeping him busy will reduce the possibility of making mistakes. Of course, in this era of rapid technological advancement, there is so much to learn. Even he, the chief of general staff, thinks there is not enough time, and those generals should learn more. When the lights were almost on, Simeon ended the summary meeting. When he was about to leave, his secretary suddenly came over. Admiral, Menelik II, Emperor of Abyssinia, would like to entertain you. Menelik II was also an old acquaintance. When he heard that the other party wanted to entertain him, Simone decided to go and have a look. The other party is the monarch of an Italian vassal country, and it is impossible to instigate rebellion against him anyway. No, tell him I'll be there in a minute. Okay, I'll answer the other person right away. Located 3 kilometers away from the exercise site, Menelik II built his palace here. The palace is just a few tents connected together. But considering that there are also many nomadic Abyssinians, you don't need to worry too much. Of course today, the big account has been prepared by the servants, and the exquisite food and shiny silver tableaux are placed in front of the dining table, waiting for the arrival of the guests. There were only 2 guests of honor at this banquet. Apart from the host Menelik II, the guest Simone was the guest. Simone, who didn't keep Menelik II waiting any longer, and didn't change his clothes, quickly arrived on horseback. Long time no see, my friend. Long time no see, Menelik II. After a brief greeting between the two, the guest of honor took his seat. As beautiful music sounded, a dinner party officially began. After a while of drinking, Menelik II waved the servants to leave, and then revealed the purpose of the banquet. General Simeon, let me tell you the truth. I have something to ask for at this banquet. Upon hearing Menelik II's words, Simone raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and he knew that something must be wrong with the emperor. Of course, whether it can help or not depends on what happened. Your Majesty, please tell me if you have anything. If I have the ability to help, I will not refuse. The thing is like this. Our country is facing the invasion of Sudan, and has fought with it several times. Although Sudan has not been able to seize a land, the successive wars have made our people miserable, so our country hopes to get help from your country. As a senior member of the Italian military, Simeon certainly knew about the dispute between Abyssinia and Sudan over Lake Tana. And he not only knows, but also knows the Italian side's response. That is to allow the struggle between Abyssinia and Sudan to continue and give both parties an opportunity for continued bloodshed. Yes, Italy's strategy for this battle involving the two parties is to keep them bleeding. Even though Abyssinia was a vassal state of Italy, Menelik II always treated Italy with respect. The reason is simple. Abyssinia's current situation does not reassure Italy. Comprehensive control of costs is too high, and Italy is unwilling to let go, which feels a bit tasteless. Therefore, the weapons that Italy has sold to Abyssinia in recent years basically guarantee that he can get a small advantage in the fight with Sudan, but if he wants to hurt the Sudanese, he cannot. Some people may say that Since Italy does not sell it, it can be purchased from other countries. This is obviously a layman's statement. As a vassal country, it would be taboo to find a way to purchase weapons alone, if it was known. Don't forget there are so many Italian consultants in Abyssinia, and who can guarantee that no one among them will snitch. Things like arms need to be used, and there is no way to keep them secret. Therefore, the Abyssinians have no intention of buying from other places. In fact, the shrewd Menelik II also had some guesses about Italy's approach. But what is the use of just guessing? What is more important between countries is their interests. Italy's interests in Abyssinia are limited, so how can it fully support itself? This time Menelik II also spent a lot of money, and must get Italy's full help. This time, our country hopes that Italy can get help from your country in terms of legal and government affairs. At the same time, our country is also willing to go further with your country in trade, such as reducing tariffs each other, and the exploration rights of minerals are also within the scope of negotiation. Of course, Menelik II could offer such a generous reward only under certain conditions. He continued, our country hopes to get help from Italy to purchase 20,000 M88 Carcano rifles, 60,000 Vatry M1870 rifles, 120 Maxim heavy machine guns, and 60, 57 and 75mm artillery pieces. In addition, in the narration of Menelik II, Simone immediately calculated that this was the size of the army that needed to be equipped with 100,000 people. Coupled with some of the weapons that were originally retained, the Abyssinians needed to equip 100,000, 400,000 to 50,000 people. The army, although the 60,000 Vatry M1870 rifles are obsolete in Europe, this is Africa and they are still powerful equipment. Hearing this, Simone couldn't help but pointed out, Your Majesty Menelik, I have made a rough calculation on the equipment you mentioned, and it is basically worth about 20 million lire. I wonder if your country can afford that much money. Yes, Simeon had serious doubts about Abyssinia's financial resources. Wanting Italy to give away freebies might require Abyssinians to pray to God that all Italian top brass have negative IQs. Of course, this may be a bit difficult for the Orthodox Christians of the Abyssinian faith. Facing Simone's question, Menelik II didn't care and only saw him reply, thank you General Simeon for your concern. Our country has raised tens of millions of liras for this purpose. Of course, if your country is willing to accept installment payments, there will be no problem at all. If not, our country hopes to obtain a loan from your country. I believe according to my country's financial strength, your bank is also willing to lend money to my country. At this time, Simeon finally understood what the man in front of him meant. He wanted to use the entire Abyssinia as collateral to seek help from Italy. Of course, after acquiring a huge amount of arms, the Abyssinian emperor will definitely slash his sword at the Sudanese. Even, nay, certainly land and population would be acquired from the Sudanese. Now, Simeon has to admit that Menelik II is making a huge gamble. If he wins the bet, he will become the hero of Abyssinia. If he loses, he will be ruined. To this, Simeon could only reply, it's a big deal and I have to report back to Roma. I'm waiting for your good news. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.